Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rod Ibrahim. I am one of the trustees of Castle and Environment Network in the Horn of Africa. And on behalf of PENHA trustees, I would really like to welcome you all to the 35th anniversary of PENHA, 35 years. And I personally was involved from 1991 until now. So really welcome. I would like to thank everyone who really made it the day today, and everyone else who also contributed to become today for the 31st anniversary. I think we have got a long program that says all about PENHA history, programs, achievements and challenges later, and also the book launch. So I will leave that you will have a lot of information about PENHA then, but I would really like to welcome our first guest and the keynote speaker, Dr. Tegeste Gabre, and who was former executive secretary of IGAD, and FAO representative of Iraq and Afghanistan. Welcome, Dr. Tegeste.
Thank you very much. It was not long ago that we were here for the celebration of PENHA's 25th anniversary. Now it is 35th anniversary. Can anyone tell me the name of 35th anniversary? Does anyone know what you call it? It's called choral anniversary. It's wedding. So, because choral is strong and for succession. I myself have celebrated my 50th wedding anniversary just 2 weeks ago, and thank you. So PENHA has catch up to do. Dear colleagues, it's a privilege and a deep honor to stand before you today as we celebrate the 35th anniversary of this extraordinary pastoral and environmental network in the Horn of Africa. May we clap for them. This anniversary is a testament to the strength, resilience, and determination of pastoralist communities who have done their share to care for this region's land, that's the Horn of Africa, its culture and environment. It's also a testament and recognition of the efforts PENHA made in the region in all those years. PENHA was founded on the principles of focusing attention and advocacy for pastoralists and the environment. For centuries, the pastoral communities of the Horn of Africa have thrived in harmony with their environment, crafting a way of life that is adaptive as is enduring. Yet they were seen as simply people who like to wander around harsh environments with their animals and families without motive. Not anymore. PENHA helped to change this attitude. Today we recognize that legacy and perseverance. We acknowledge the wisdom embedded in traditional practices. The Mariam and the team call it knowledge sovereignty. The courage to adapt to change and the foresight to build systems that bridge the old and the new. I personally witnessed closely PENHA's work and saw the change when I was in Djibouti. I observed PENHA staff crisscrossing through Djibouti to countries such as Kenya, Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia, and others. Your network stands as a beacon of hope, not limited to the Horn of Africa, but beyond. At a time when the challenge of climate change, environmental degradation, and the conflicts threaten livelihoods, your efforts remind us that solutions often lie within the communities most impacted. Pastoralism is a way of reading the land, listening to its needs, and responding with care. Pastoralists have long understood the value of biodiversity, the importance of sustainable land management, and the need to adapt to an ever-changing climate. They have survived for generations in often harsh environments. PENHA works By understanding these values and by integrating innovative approach to address contemporary challenges, PENHA promoted advocacy for pastoralist rights, capacity building research, and environmental management. Some have been incorporated in countries' laws. I'm sure that Mariam will talk about it. As the first executive secretary of IGAD, I knew it then, and I know it now, that the Horn of Africa is a region of immense potential, but also of immense challenges. Climate shocks, droughts, and conflicts have taken their toll on communities and ecosystems alike. Yet, in the face of these adversities, you, PENHA, like the pastoralists, have shown resilience. Your network has become a lifeline for many, strengthening food security, empowering women and youth, fostering peace, and advocating for policy changes that prioritize pastoral and environmental well-being. This work is a powerful reminder that even in the most vulnerable regions, innovation and resilience can thrive, and thrive you did for 35 years and still going. Pastoralism will be challenged due to the current hot topic of climate change. How we adapt to mitigate the impact on pastoralists could be the biggest challenge that PENHA could face. Yet, your adaptation could contribute to global knowledge of addressing the problem. We see COP meetings now reaching 29, but it seems we are not nearer to any global working arrangement. I worry that the vulnerable communities like the pastoralists could become the victims. As we celebrate your achievements, let us also recommit ourselves to the work ahead. This is not a time for complacency, but for renewed energy. And all of us, speakers, policymakers, practitioners, must amplify the voices of those who have lived and cared for this land for generations. Looking to the future, I am inspired by the possibility of what this network can achieve. It can inspire young people to see pastoralism not as a relic of the past, but as a dynamic and viable future. It can set an example of how communities and nature can thrive together. Let me conclude by expressing my deepest respect and gratitude for your work. You remind us that the health of our planet and the well-being of our people are inseparable. In your own modest way, you have contributed to it. Your courage and commitment shines as a light for us all. As we mark this anniversary, let us celebrate not just the years that have passed, but the bright future that lies ahead. One shaped by your vision, your strengths, and your unwavering dedication for the Horn of Africa region. I wish you a fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
And now, the founder, Dr. Sarah Mariam, will really take you to some reflections of PENHA achievements and challenge. Welcome, PENHA.
Thank you. Thank you. I also got slides. I don't know whether you can see the. Yeah, good. They'll be available. People who have, I'm a bit worded, but never mind. I have to put the thoughts together. That one is okay. Hello, my name is Mariam Frey, and I think Takaste's introduction catches the spirit and the content of our work. What I try to do is the organization has been through highs and lows, disappointments, because remember we live in a conflict-prone zone. Things can change overnight, and I think to keep going in that context is very important, not to lose hope. I'm one of the people who believe that, as you can see from the map, we did not put the different countries. It says a lot in a sense of the history of commonality. Where the politics are important, of course, we have identities, we have countries, but when you look at the region as a whole, the shared values, the shared civilizations, shared traditions are probably the pastor's communities reflect that, crossing borders, trading with each other, across religions, across ethnicities. So in a way, we deliberately put this horn, what is it, the logo of the organization. Now, going to what I will try to do here, as in for those of you who are not very familiar with these issues we're talking about. You're going a bit too fast, revealing the secrets. What I'll try to do is I'll just give you a bit of an overview of this livelihood. For me, fundamentally, in our region, although Takasta kindly put it in a modest way, the problem has always been that the urbanites and settled communities look down upon those communities, the pastor's communities, somehow in the culture. It's built in. Therefore, our challenge has been to create a group of people like-minded. It doesn't matter, we don't care whether Highlanders, Lowlanders, Nomads. The idea was to create a spirit of collaboration. There's an understanding, because I think basically this way of life is misunderstood, as you can see in the pictures we have in the images we have. So when we started PENHA, and I have to be very honest with you, the greatest dream was to move it from a network to an institute, the regional institute, a knowledge hub, you know, as Takasa put it. But the conflicts in our region didn't help us to do that. So therefore, we still maintain the network idea. Although the first 10 years, 5 years in the beginning, we had a vision of setting up a center of excellence, because there was definitely a gap in knowledge. So what do we do from an African perspective? We pride ourselves being African-led, inspired, and what do we do about our situation in our country? So really, but then I think we even have a space in one of the universities. I should probably mention in the countries, because I've been in trouble, you know. We were about to set up the institute, but then when the conflict came in these countries, well, we were not able to do it. So that was the biggest disappointment, because I think a center of excellence like that would have served a purpose in generating knowledge and also practicing some good things. So what I will try to do now is, just for the sake of those who are not familiar with this pastoralism issue, I want to say a few things, like the population of the Horn, you know, I'm sorry. We have about 330 million people altogether in the whole region. And an estimated 10 million of them are in the pastoral areas. Maybe this could be not very reliable, because I don't even know when was the last census in the Horn, you know. I don't really remember in Sudan, Ethiopia. I don't know when. You tell me. We had, let alone to separate this livelihood system. We don't even know the population as a whole, you know. And I think this is. Then I think the other thing is the ecological diversity of the livelihoods. The ecological diversity of the environment, we can look at the next slide, enables different ways of, you know, this is the ecological setting, you see, the green bit, the mountains bit, and then it shows some idea. Because the pastoralism is based on that. And I think also the region shares diversity of cultures, religions, and different civilizations. I'm proud to say our region is, in that sense, a region to be proud of, despite the current problems. You can go back in history for centuries, proudly so. And it's also a region in a troubled region, you know, starting from the Soviet times to now, with all these superpowers, you know, liking us, not leaving us alone, unfortunately. And the conflict proneness is another issue, unfortunately. This affects all the communities, whether they're pastoral, whether they are urban, peri-urban. We should not forget that. Especially, as you can see now, there's a lot of unplanned urbanization and high levels of poverty among both the urban poor and the pastoralist communities. This is also something we should. Sometimes I think when you are in a group like this, you become like a preacher. You know, you become like an evangelist. You forget the rest, the livelihoods. I myself, I'm not from a nomadic area. My parents were farmers, you know, small farmers, you know. But I didn't particularly like it. I love the nomadic people who have the milk, the meat coming to our town, you know. So in a way, I think we should be very careful not to divide these communities unnecessarily. So this is the location of the region of the various countries, the geographical. I think this is what I call the ecological setting, which determines the livelihood systems. I forgot fisheries. I think our region is not very good in fisheries. The Somalis are better, but I think our region could have been richer if we are more efficient use of marine resources, especially the fisheries along the coast. So then the next one is the political setting. Yeah, that's right. I have included Southern Sudan because of the divorce between the North and the South. I have not included Somaliland as a separate country yet. So excuse me, Rhoda, I put Somalia as a whole, as a country with the flag. I've been there many times, so don't start on me. she just she just came back last week from the elections. I'm a bit embarrassed, but I've been to Somaliland. I know the sentiment, very strong. But I hope for Somalis, for me, are brothers and sisters. I don't care whether it's from the north or south. And this is my feeling. And I feel at home. So these are the countries, and then basically just move forward. Now, this is the other one is the the next slide. Yeah, I like this one. I don't know where I got it from. I plagiarized it. This is the ethnic identity. The different groups, cultural groups, range of people. I don't know. I plagiarized it. I don't know where I got it from, but it just gives you some idea what the communities, the heritage of the communities, very different. I mean, you can work it out for yourself. Now, let me talk a little bit very fast. I'm aware of the time. What I want to say is a couple of key points, in the sense that we need to appreciate the knowledge systems in these countries, as Takasa said. This is, I think, we produce some of the best animals, high milking yields, etc., and I can talk about that. And the other point is also the pastoralism lacks uniformity. It's not one type. It's not camel herding or sheep and goats, but it's a mix, so we have to appreciate that diversity in all our countries. I'm not talking about, so there's nothing called pure pastoralists. People combine activities, and you only have to go to the Somalis among us who are the most pastoralist oriented, and yet they have other businesses. They're very good even exporting livestock to the Middle East. So there's a commerce. So highland lowland dichotomy, sometimes I think there's a fictitious belief that highlanders and lowlanders are always at war because of their livelihood system. That's not correct from my experience. It's just that the interaction between the peasants in the highlands and the nomadic pastoralists are not recognized. In many of our countries, there is interaction, economic interaction, because livestock are a major asset. Multi-species herding also, they produce so many animals within the same herd. You have sheep, goats, mixed. So sometimes we need to appreciate that diversity, which is quite smart. Also, my particular interest is on the knowledge systems. My professor is here, John Boiboli is there at the back. I studied agriculture in this country, and as a student, as a PhD student, the masters, I questioned the knowledge system. How come this Western knowledge is superior to the indigenous knowledge we have in our countries? I was quite fanatic about it. What's the comparative advantage of indigenous knowledge systems? I even wrote a book about knowledge sovereignty. You can check it on thanks to UCL. I put something together arguing this is a knowledge system scientifically which can be validated, and yet our elite universities, we just ignore it. This kind of knowledge is not worth it, which is not true, and I'm going to show you some evidence of that in a minute. The contribution to the local economy is amazing. Many of our countries are sustained on the livestock economy. We don't recognize it as countries. We don't support the producers, for example, through value addition, through the economy, etc., etc. There is a sort of deep, and the Middle East is benefiting from us. On the question of Ibn Auf, for example, our Sudanese friend here, a very dear friend, he passed away some time ago. So I just want to say, he insisted on the policy interventions and the constraints that many of our national governments don't really take this livelihood seriously. There is a real gap in that. And also, the unpredictable political environment is not helping. But this is true for other communities, we should not forget. I mean, in a Horn, if you are, whether you're a peasant farmer, whether you're an urban dweller, whether you are a nomadic community, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm very sorry to say that, This is a bit of in the past, maybe the pastoral areas were full of troubles, but I don't think so anymore. I think many of our countries are in trouble now, I'm very sorry. Look at the Sudan, for example. Are we going to say the Sudanese urban people are okay? Not, it is the reality. The conflict is affecting even the fundamentals of our economic systems. Then, Ibn Auf also criticized the absence of livestock policies at various levels, both the local and national. And this is very true. I mean, the Arabs were buying many of our animals from the region, at the knockdown prices. And this is not even recorded, by the way, for your information. I went to Dubai to the camel races, and you can easily find one of the Sudanese, my Sudanese friends are here, a male camel, a race camel would fetch about $2,000 in Dubai, you know. And I actually saw the camel races, and then I said, what's wrong with us? Because locally, that kind of camel, if you buy it in Port Sudan or Kassala or Khartoum, you'll be getting probably a couple of $100, you know, for the same. And this is why I'm talking about value addition. And the states are not being interested in promoting that and advocating for those communities. In the national, for example, in the poverty reduction strategy papers, if you see in many of our countries where I looked at, they really talk generally about livestock sector, but actually the understanding and pro-poor development in this particular areas is not there. Data is not there, but I have to say, as Takasa said, we are happy, and my friend John Morton and others also, we contributed either through our PhDs or our discussions internationally, even ODI, you know. Then a lot has happened. IIED, the International Environment Development, our own institutions in the countries, universities were now emerging, what I call the emerging institutions have been. Also in general, there's a lack of participatory approaches when development interventions are planned in our country. And this is, I'm very sorry to go on and on about this. This is an internal criticism ourselves. We should look at ourselves and do something about the situation. Then you come to, this is what I was talking about. The knowledge systems, you know? What happened to the other picture? The Ugandans. Yeah, exactly. You know, JJ is from Uganda, so he went straight to the Ugandan cattle, long horns, you know, unconsciously, excuse him. So basically, what I'm trying to do is to demonstrate many of these, sorry, JJ, I'm joking, to demonstrate the fact that these are genetic resources, you know, and it's amazing when you look at the study of the productivity of these animals, you know, you just get carried away. It's unbelievable, the resistance to diseases, you know, the culture which goes along with breeding these animals. It's fascinating. For example, this is in Eritrea and Sudan. These are the famous Begait Baraka cattle, both on both sides, and also to show you my particular book concentrates on these animals, you know, the productivity, the management, traditional medicine, how these animals treated also. So I think, unfortunately, and we have been really inspiring our institution to do research on the indigenous breeds, you know, their capacity, their qualities, you know, rather than copying the Western kind of analytical approach to these animals, rather than, you know, resistance to diseases, traditional ethnoveterinary medicine, ethnobotany, you know, all those kind of things could go very nicely for those people like Baye from Ethiopia, who's in front of me, to do research like that, to actually dig down into the farming systems. And then you move to the next one. I want to show you this is the Ugandan cattle, Ankole, in southwestern Uganda. Again, this is a tradition, you know, I mean, producing this kind of, look at the science of it, you know, think about it as a science, you know. You don't just, these animals don't come from up there, you know, they're bred with a purpose. And for my culture, where I come from, I think it's also true for Ethiopia and Eritrea, Sudan as well, having long horns with a cattle is not a good idea at all. I mean, because you use them for farming, you know. My father was a farmer, therefore you don't need these animals with long horns. In Uganda, when I went to the southwest of Uganda, you know, and very close to the Rwanda border, this is fashionable. The herders I talked to get great pride. For them, it's not about milk. It's about the dignity of these animals, the personality of them. And this is also defense, you know. You're not going to play games with this cattle. If you raid them, you're going to be in trouble, you know. You're going to be. So that's, you know what I'm trying to say. This is science, you know. It's a different way of looking at it. Not productivity, not sort of. But then also, when I looked at the productivity of the animals, they are good for beef, you know, but productivity-wise, for milk, they are not, you know. So, you know what I'm trying to say is, this is a sort of heritage we have, and these animals being produced for different purposes. It's a kind of science, as far as I'm concerned. Then you got the Sudanese short-horned Arabi, they call them. I don't know why you Sudanese can tell me. Why do they call them Arabi? You know, these are northeastern Sudan. The short-horned cattle there. They are very productive milk, so I don't know why you call them Arabi. Did they come from the Arab countries, or did just you tell me? This is a breed called Arabi, actually, and this is the Ankole cattle. So they are, interestingly, some of these cattle are also in some parts of the Horn, where I don't know how they arrived there, whether they went south from our part or they came from that side. I'm not sure. This is selfish. So basically, what I'm trying to see is very quickly. I have to finish. She's looking at me. This is another type of animals, as you can see there. It's in the Sudan. This is what they call the red butana in the deserts of eastern Sudan, and northern Sudan, and the camels, the very famous desert camels. I say this for a reason, because this is all science when you look at it seriously. Now I come to Somalia. Livestock trade is the most advanced in our region. I think the Somalis have a very strong sense of business, And even what you call nomads who would be interested, they are very interested in selling animals. This is during the Berbera port now, where our Ethiopian friends are trying to be friends with our Somaliland friends, for all sorts of reasons. So Berbera port is a very important connection to the Middle East. And even the livestock from Ethiopia are shipped through that way. And that's why Berbera becomes strategically important for Ethiopia. Although I would have liked the Ethiopians to trade with Eritrea, which is next door, but never mind. They went somewhere else, so it's a free country, as they say. So this livestock here, look, I went to this place in Berbera, quite fascinating. These animals are collected from various parts of the region, including Ethiopia, and then they shipped out to the Middle East. The sad thing is, in terms of value addition, and this is what adds to the poverty of the pastoralist communities, in terms of value addition, it's a shame, because the producers are losing out, Local traders buy these animals and ship them out to the Middle East. God knows for how much they sell them. I gave you the example of the camel, so I think that's where the same for sheep and goats here on the other side. This major merchants was okay. Now, very quickly, let's come to. Okay, now I'll try to finish the crisis they are facing. This is very common also for the farmers. I would spell them out in the following way: the high and low intensity conflicts impacting on livestock owners as well as other communities. Look at our countries now. In fact, when you think about it now, what are we going to do as PENHA? We had this focus on pastoralist community, and yet now, when you look at the disasters currently happening. Who is safe, And this is tragic. There's a lot of intensity of fighting, depending which part of the region you're in. This is impacting. Very sorry also now to remember particularly the situation in the Sudan, where we're really seeing, tragedy within itself. And I'm not saying the other countries don't have tragedies, but I mean the Sudan case, historically they're the ones who accommodate all these people in our countries. So it's heartbreaking to see the Sudanese also going through this serious challenge. Two armies just facing one another, which is a catastrophic potential. Land grabbing is an issue. I'm sure you know this. The pastoralist lands are grabbed by so many forces. I would say starting with the local elite, the urban elite, the politicians, and the diaspora, of course, like us, who lived outside, and they want to go and just get, some tendency in the pastoral areas to so-called develop it, So there's an issue here where land grabbing has also got worse during the financial crisis a few years back. And climate change, the recurrent drought, is this affecting also the farmers and the pastoralists. We should not forget that. I think our institutions, by and large, from what I know, they're still promoting the green revolution approach, These African farmer systems are, they just should, that self-inflicted, and the elites who studied abroad, and they just want to preach that book, without questioning the productivity of the local breeds, local crops. I don't see much of that even now, and I'm very sorry to say that. There's also the question of invasive species. This is much of the grazing lands now have been taken over by non-palatable species. One of them would be, in Sudan they call it mesquite. This is prosopis. In fact, it was introduced by the Sudanese long time ago from Peru, from South America. And I know this because I've been to Peru to see how that plant is managed, So some guys brought it to our region, and now the whole dryland areas are really affected by this green, very green plant which actually has no value if you don't use it properly, you know. If you don't, it is toxic. So the animals eat the green plants and then they get really, I mean, we're not managing it. Instead of affecting the whole region now in the dryland areas. I will move forward on this rather than hurry up. And then what else have I got? Yeah, climate change is an issue. Grabbing of the land is an issue. Support for governments, we could do more. But we have done a lot. In fact, in many of our countries now, we have courses on pastoralism, you know, policy advocacy and this kind of thing. So it's not a hopeless case. Displacement is an issue for all the communities now in the Horn, which is very sad, you know. Now this one is interesting. The land grabbing, to give you a sense of what happened in 2009, you know. You can see how the grabbed is the grabbing and the grabbed, you know. So our region here, as you can see very clearly, you know, the land grabbing both international and within the Middle East. Many of the lands, you know, predominantly pastoral areas, forests, you know, they've been taken over by companies. It could be Indian companies, it could be American companies or British, whatever, you know. So there's an issue also within the elite, within these countries, ruling elites, you know. The political systems have used in displacing the pastoralist communities. This is an issue which I think is lingering, but hopefully we, at the moment, I think priority is peace building rather than... now what are, very briefly now towards the end, the emerging livelihood systems. I think sometimes we also forget the love of nomadism, you know, makes you forget actually the transition within these communities. Huge transition. I mean, number one, the creating of rural-urban linkages and the inter-economic linkages is very clear. And this is not particular in our region, but it's also very common elsewhere. The income generation diversification. Some of these pastoralist communities have now their boys and sons and daughters educated somewhere. They're sending them remittances. So in a way that diversifies the economy in other ways. Local government, yes, I think I have to say, when we started PENHA, there was a hopeless case. You know, there was no voice for pastoralist people. There are now, I think there are more positive signs. For example, you got an elite from the pastoralist backgrounds, you know, grabbing the power in some countries, which is also means they support some projects, intervention in the pastoral areas. Social services, a long way to go, because among the urban elite, you know, what you have to have is just a settled education. There's no preparation for a more kind of mobile clinics or mobile schools, for example. Communication is an issue. You'll be surprised, for example, when you go to the Sudan in the old days, the nomads will make a call to Khartoum, which is say 500 kilometers away, and they ask what are the prices for camels or cattle, you know. So the communication is widely used among the pastoralist communities, and this is very important in terms of keeping the, you know, the communication. Gender roles are changing slowly, but I think now, because of the crisis, ownership of livestock is changing. So you see more women are now owning livestock products and also processing the livestock products. Sedentarization to a degree, either encouraged or forced upon them by circumstances, and ensuring social services in some cases. Communication, as I said, is indigenous knowledge systems are still, they could be developed. Now I just want to give you a quick example from Sudan, Kassala region. I just put there as an example how this, the black bit is the Kassala town, and then the riverine areas, the green is the what you call the Takaza River. This is the wetland area. So how they migrate. So what I did was I made this picture. You know what, the people, the herders, when they travel seasonally in the wetland areas, then the family are kept around the cities. You know, this is a new pattern of settlement. The families, the women and children, are kept not far from a city, from Kassala city, for instance, 5-10 kilometers. And then what happens is the herders bring the milk on a lorry to Kassala town, which is probably about 60-70 kilometers, and then they buy
They visit their families as well, and then they buy all the necessary animal, sugar and other stuff for them. Just there's a kind of pattern, and I think this would be a fantastic PhD students if anyone want to do this. It's a fascinating piece of research. This is the kind I'm looking at, that guy, that French guy who was my student. So it would be fantastic to do research like, because this is what we are not doing, the transformation. It's also equally true for the farming communities, What am I? My father had a couple of hectares of land near my hometown. Mother was great, she said to me, get on with your education, that's the only hope. She was right, I realized how right she was. She didn't want me to become a farmer like my dad, So this is also where the role of women sometimes should be studied properly, not just cosmetically. And I think this the very last I'll show some images on the emerging livelihoods, and I try to be as fair as possible, not romantic about this. These are Hargeisa town, her town in Somaliland, and they still dominate this economy, small stock sales. Animal products. I saw it with my own eyes. This is not exaggerated. So, exchange of stock and this kind of traditionally male-dominated society. You can see the change. And then it comes the next one. Same old, so I just went to rural-urban linkages again in Somaliland. How the rural and urban is linked, and then who dominates that sort of trade. And then, last but not least, also. You can see the question of charcoal. This is among the Eastern Sudan and also among the Afar in Ethiopia. You can see the charcoal is another income generator. You can argue this is destroying the environment, of course, but what else can you do? This is also another. I'm going to finish now in one, literally conclude my remarks very quickly. So there is a change in the livelihood. Number one, as I said, but the government policy, we are pushing, governments are now assume that sedentary life is better than what we call the so-called semi-nomadic, which is not even nomadic. Who is not a nomad, by the way? I ask myself, I'm also a nomad here, so nomadism is a question of going where the pasture is green sometimes. That's human nature. I didn't come here for green pasture, but I say normally nomadism has to do, the mobility has to do with going somewhere better. Do you agree with me, Rhoda? Oh, thank you. No, the government are pushing for induced settlement, give these bloody stupid nomads, schools, they will settle down. They will not settle down in that way. I think there must be a real thinking policy-wise. First of all, why they have to change it, Secondly, if I can be critical about my friends who are from the agricultural background like the Takaste, I was teasing my highland friends sometimes, say, Ethiopians, and I said, what's so good about this farming system in the highlands? You are using an oxen history from 2,000 years ago. And the only change in that system is the share of the plow, they put metal instead of the wood. And I said, even in the Old, I'm going to be a Christian now for 2 minutes. Even in the Old Testament, it says when you thresh the corn on the floor, threshing of corn. Remember, they don't have tractors, so when you harvest the crops, lay them down, and the animals have to step on, the oxen has to step over. Maybe you don't know this because you are from a nomadic area. So, so anyway, my point is this. Even that technology we have in our highlands, when you look at it very seriously, you ask yourself, what's the difference between these two systems? One is agricultural, obviously, but it hasn't changed. The other one is also livestock, which is sort of. So I think we have to be a bit fair in understanding those systems in the value. I think I'll just finish now. I'm done, basically. I have just to conclude by remembering some of the good friends of ours. I think our Case Maxi, his wife is here, Reverend Rev Sheila is here. So we lost PENHA friends, Nicole Kenton, who was a board member. Her daughter is there. Can you show yourself? There, she's here representing. And those two great supporters of PENHA for many, many years, I would like us to remember them. Also, I think our Sudanese and Ethiopian friends from the past, these were our supervisors when we did the PhD. Professor Al-Hadi Abu Suin and Dr. Abbas Musa Shasha. Those are from Khartoum University. Very supportive of the PENHA initiative in the beginning. They even suggested whether we call it African Nomadic Association instead of PENHA, you know. I think at that time, call it a wider African network rather than the Horn of Africa. Maybe it's a good idea. Then we also remember, you know, the Commissioner of Refugees, Ahmed Karadawi, who John and I know very well. And these are people who have given their time and support to PENHA a long time ago. They passed away. Also our friends, Professor Siyum Gabriel at Addis Ababa University, who was really helping our dream to become an institute. He enabled us to have a space within Addis Ababa University, and when we started to work there, but unfortunately because of these conflict issues, we weren't able to pursue the idea of our institute. But these were great people who helped us. Dr. Ababaya Asafa engineer, he's also from the University of Addis Ababa. His support and solidarity. Where is his daughter is here with us now. So I just want to acknowledge, and last but not least, the artist, the Ethiopian artist, Zamada Haile Mariam, who's an Ethiopian artist, you know, see the paintings over there. He is the one who produced those paintings for us 25 years ago, and we'd like also to remember those people. I mean, more people I could talk about, but I guess just want to mention a few. On that note, I'm done. Thank you very much. And the last photograph is, you know, the solidarity with the Peruvian Highlanders when I was there, and myself with Ethiopian pastoralists. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah Mariam. Dr. Sarah Mariam. Really, that was passionate about it. I know always. I think the next team will be coming here. Hello? The next team will be here about PENHA history program and future directions.
Thank you all very much, and it's great to see such a turnout here to celebrate PENHA's 35th anniversary. I'm John Morton. I'm Professor of Anthropology at the Natural Resources Institute at the University of Greenwich, and pastoralism has been a dominant theme in my research and consultancy career over several decades. I go back a long way with PENHA. I was present at the first meeting in the old ODI offices in Regent's Park, in fact, and have a special connection with that meeting because I was the only person at that stage who owned what we then referred to as a word processor that Zare knew. So I got the task of writing up the minutes of that meeting. But my involvement with PENHA was much more varied than that. I was for several years a trustee, and for some years also chair of trustees, and I've worked on at least one joint research project with John Livingston, who's one of the authors of the presentation we're about to see. We're about to see a pre-recorded presentation where I think Amsale Shibeshi will take us through some slides that she has prepared with John Livingston and with Sadia, all from the Hargeisa office. That will last about 20 minutes, and after that, Dr. Rita Lambert here will act as a discussant to that presentation. Rita is Associate Professor at the Development Planning Unit of University College London. After that, I very much welcome questions and comments from the floor. In terms of questions, it's not necessarily clear who's going to answer your questions, as John and Amsale, I don't think, can be online to answer them, but we hope the current PENHA crew and each of you can answer the questions put and also contribute your own viewpoints on some of the issues facing PENHA. So with that, I would like to hand over, systems permitting, to the presentation that's been prepared by the team in Hargeisa. Thank you very much.
I'm Saleh Shibeshi. I'm PENHA Regional Programs Coordinator. Today I will be presenting the region's history up to 2024. So today we'll give an overview of PENHA's work in the region. We cannot cover everything, so much has been done over the years. But we want to give a sense of our track record and the great potential that exists to do more with new priorities. So much has changed over the years. This is a young region in terms of demographic. Pastoralism has shown that it can be dynamic, both modern and mobile. Women and youth are playing much greater roles with both challenges and opportunities. What we will cover today? Today we'll describe PENHA's approach, aims, and core principles. We'll also describe PENHA's history over the past 35 years in the region. We'll briefly look at PENHA's international partners and sources of funding with a view to the future. Then we'll look at research and project implementation before finishing with an outline of future directions. PENHA's aims and objectives and approaches. We aim to link up the grassroots and the policy levels. We have a set of core principles, including gender equality. We combine research and project implementation so that each informs the other. Research strengthens the work on the ground, and insights from project experience, which feeds into research and policy work. Beginnings of in London, PENHA's history. PENHA began as a network of British and Horn of Africa academics and practitioners established in 1989, working closely with the UK's ODI and IIED. In 2015, we held a 25th anniversary conference at ODI that brought together many of our colleagues and partners from different NGOs, universities, and research institutions, including IIED, IDS, and others. PENHA began as a network and established a regional office at Addis Ababa University in 1992, staffed by experts from all the Horn countries, with a sub-office in Asmara, Eritrea. PENHA also collaborated closely with Mekelle University from its inception. After the Ethio-Eritrean War in 1998, PENHA was forced out of Ethiopia. PENHA subsequently worked through regional offices in Hargeisa, Somaliland, Khartoum, Sudan, and Kampala in Uganda. PENHA established different country offices over the years. In each country, PENHA has a small core staff supplemented by a network of specialists who come in as needed. This enables PENHA to expand and contract in line with the available funding. It also makes for a very collaborative way of working. PENHA is a network of people who are committed to development. PENHA International Partners. PENHA has a number of international partners. We work with British universities, mainly UCL, and universities across the region. Over the past 10 years or so, we have had close relationships with FAO and GIZ as implementing partners. We have done baseline studies and analysis for them and organize workshops and training events. We are also a member of FAO's Pastoralist Knowledge Hub and CELEP. PENHA's collaboration with Trepenbos International, TBI, of the Netherlands over recent years has been very fruitful. While PENHA is locally rooted, these international partnerships are vital. They enable PENHA to draw on and contribute to the latest research and analysis, and they help PENHA to have a stronger voice in policy debates. PENHA's London office has played a central role in developing these international collaborations, and the London base remains vital. The London office provides a link to European development debates and to the growing diaspora. It also helps to ensure that PENHA maintains a regional identity. PENHA is not a Somali or an Ethiopian or a Sudanese organization. PENHA country chapters have no clan or ethnic bias. PENHA sources of funding. FAO and GIZ have been important sources of funding for us, as well as the Somali Development Fund. We have had a very diverse set of donors over the years. DFID FCDO was the main source of funding for our seawater greenhouse project in Berbera. In Ethiopia, the current program is largely Dutch funded, with a new funding linked to UN climate change programs. We need to diversify our funding base and tap into new sources of funding for new priorities: climate change, gender, youth, and value chains. Ongoing work with ZNEP and UNIDO should lead to a substantial new programs in Ethiopia in 2026, covering Afar, Amhara, Somali, and Tigray regions. PENHA research capabilities. We have carried out a wide range of research over the years, and PENHA Associates contributed 5 chapters to IDS 2013 book on pastoral development, including a chapter based on our Danida-funded Women's Economic Empowerment Program. Research has always been oriented towards addressing key development issues. The PSNP and PENHA's recent publication. PENHA's book on Ethiopia's safety net program in Ethiopia addressed a number of important issues. It highlighted the need to integrate existing social capital into safety net programs and to adopt a much more participatory approach. Ethiopian associates have been involved in efforts to enhance the implementation on the ground. The PSNP involves an approach similar to what we have tried to do with an FAO in Somaliland, putting money in people's pockets and building environmental infrastructure for the long term with cash for work. But in Somaliland, the strength of traditional institutions and the use of digital technology with biometrics and digital cash transfers made implementation much more effective. PENHA has produced a number of studies and publications over the couple of years, as you can see in the slides. The ones we have just seen are some of the recent publications which have informed policy and practice. Combining research and project implementation. Research feeds into and draws on our work on the ground. Core areas are livelihoods, environmental management, water supply, gender equality, and women's empowerment. PENHA Somaliland project implementation from 2021. Since 2001, we have implemented a number of projects across the country. The focus has been on livelihoods and environmental management, working closely with local institutions and community groups. Over recent years, PENHA has carried out a number of GESI, gender equality and social inclusion studies for the Somaliland Development Fund, supporting the design of government programs in agriculture, livestock, transport, fisheries, and water sectors. Currently, PENHA Somaliland is also working with the government of Djibouti to develop a prosopis control and use program in collaboration also with FAO Djibouti. Our seawater greenhouse project in Berbera is the first of its kind in the region. PENHA Seawater Greenhouse Project was designed by Charlie Payton of Seawater Greenhouse Limited, UK. It uses solar power desalination for horticulture and salt production. It has been successfully introduced in the Gulf and in Australia. But this is a slightly different scale-down design. With NIVA of Norway, we are trying to adapt it to extract minerals such as lithium from the seawater. PENHA's TBI program in Ethiopia. PENHA has worked with TBI and C4 aircraft to develop a national drylands restoration strategy, integrating trees, crops, and livestock with livelihoods and inclusive value chain development at the center. This has been officially endorsed by the government. Contextualized regional strategies have also been developed. PENHA and partners are now implementing the strategy on the ground in Tigray and Afar regions. The national strategy developed and then it was cascaded to the regions. These photos show the published strategy and some of the validation workshops in the regions. Activities in the Tigray-Afar border landscape. The landscape restoration work involves FMNR, farmer-managed natural resources, closing off areas to allow natural regeneration, contour terraces and bands, etc., as well as a livelihood component with women and youth. The work is implemented by a PENHA-led consortium involving C4 aircraft, Mekelle University, Samara University, and local and regional government institutions. It adapts to and mitigates climate change, enhances the ecosystem services that underpin the livelihoods of farmers, agro-pastoralists, and pastoralists, while increasing local incomes through value chain development and private sector engagement. C4 and aircraft's RRC, Rural Resource Center model. It involves establishing 3 nurseries as commercially self-sustaining centers for the production and sale of quality planting materials. Our center at the Arato site is managed by the Tsegereda Women's Association, which collaborates with local youth groups. The Abogerebs, Fathers of the Trees, Association of Elders from Tigray and Afar are important partners overseeing natural resource management and conflict resolution. So this is the 3 nursery rehabilitation and quality seedling production of our site. The nursery in Tigray, which is managed by women, supplies planting materials on a commercial basis and is building the capacity to be a supplier to the large-scale tree planting Green Legacy initiative. In the dryland, selected commercial trees will complement natural regeneration of acacia woodlands and emphasize fodder for livestock, combining trees, crops, and livestock with value chain development and policy influence. The work on the Tigray-Afar landscape involves an integrated landscape management approach that aims to meet environment and climate goals, at the same time as strengthening local livelihoods, building local capacity, and delivering tangible benefits to local people. Men, women, youth, farmers, agro-pastoralists, and pastoralists. By working with others and with local institutions and government, we hope to achieve impact at scale. PENHA has helped to develop a national strategy that is backed by a significant allocation of government funding. Collaboration across borders. In 2024, PENHA collaborated with Hello Trust to implement a project that brought demined land back into productive use. We are exploring the possibilities to implement a similar project in war-affected Tigray and Afar. Over recent years, PENHA has supported lessons learning and capacity building across Tigray and Somaliland. There is a great scope to develop collaboration across the region and in impactful ways. PENHA is well placed to play a positive role in the changes that are underway in the region and internationally, linking up the grassroots and policy levels. Future directions. The region has seen tremendous changes over the years, with economic growth and social change, with increasing urbanization and migration and the digital revolution. PENHA's work has evolved over the years to address new opportunities and challenges. Climate change dominates development discourse, and the drylands of the Horn account for a large share of its carbon sequestration potential. Women and young girls play much greater roles in the economy and in society, and more inclusive and participatory approach to development must engage with all social groups, particularly the youth. Young men are sadly the main participants in the region's conflicts. Our work on the ground has an important peace-building element, and we work with traditional institutions and community groups that can play important roles in conflict resolution. PENHA's participation in national and regional forums can also help to build peace. Peace, inclusion, and economic development go together. PENHA is working to strengthen local livelihoods and develop key dryland value chains, including those for milk, fodder, frankincense, gums and raisins, and honey. In our policy work, we promote inclusive business models and private sector engagement that involves outgrower relationships between producer associations and firms. This is a major focus of recent work with GEF, with UNEP and UNIDO, and the government of Ethiopia, as well as UNDP in Somaliland. In all our work, we must remember that some 70% of the Horn's population is made up of young people. We need to involve and inspire the next generation in education, awareness, enterprise, with positive vision of diversification and social development that includes pastoralism. And I wish you fruitful deliberations, and thank you to PENHA and to all my colleagues.
I'm sure everyone enjoyed that. I don't think the Hargeisa team have been able to be online with us, but I'm sure that the London office can relay our thanks for really interesting presentation. I mean, someone who has had maybe a bit less contact with PENHA over the last few years, the lockdown and other reasons, I've been very struck how great the progress has been, and this record of new projects, new funders, new publications, etc. I'd like to hand over to Rita to get some of her take on the presentation and the bigger questions behind it about what PENHA is doing and how PENHA can go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I would like to thank Amsale. I don't know if she's hearing us right now because we are online, and I just want to thank her a lot for the presentation, because it really is a testament of the remarkable... Okay. Better? Yeah, thank you. No, I just was saying a big thanks to summarizing the work, which is really probably very difficult to summarize 35 years worth in 20 minutes, but this is a great testament of the fantastic achievements, the commitment to the region, and the ability to survive 35 years in a context in constant flux. I mean, that in itself is a great feat. And I guess my provocation, let's say, and maybe with the questions that come from the floor, will be how to survive the next 35 years, particularly now that we have an intensified context with conflict, climate change altogether. So, but to go back first to the kind of thematic areas, I'm really impressed by the kind of implementation and ability to publish and really share this knowledge throughout, which is really important. I mean, a lot of it is oral history that's kept, and to be able to really put a lot of thought and time to make this knowledge, the pastoral knowledge systems, more widely understood, and how it can then be taken into consideration in policy is, a really important advocacy work there. And with regards to the actual thematic areas, livelihood. Sorry. Okay, now? Okay, I'm going to try and speak up. Okay, so I was saying that the actual thematic entry points that PENHA has been working on, this livelihoods, environmental management, water supply and sanitation, gender equality, and women's economic empowerment really embody this very holistic approach. And these themes are not only important or only crucial in their own right, but it's precisely when we look at how deeply interconnected they are that it really shows the recognition of these multifaceted challenges of the region and what it faces. So really, particularly in the context of climate change and ongoing conflict, I would like to highlight that these are the areas, the thematic areas that in themselves are weaponized. Yeah, are weaponized to dominate, to control, to exploit. So in this sense, working through these very themes is an act of resistance and an important entry point for restorative justice when we're talking now about the conflicts. So I would say, rather than looking at peace building as yet another thematic entry point, it needs to be really transversal through these themes. Okay, so here we are having the possibility of really approaching each of these thematic areas, the implementation and the actual research on them as forms of bringing peace and restorative justice, not just as an extra theme. And so I would like to ask, so how can we approach this really? I mean, we really need to put our heads together and think, if this next year's and currently the conflict does not allow us to work in the way we want to, what are the approaches that we can take for action and research on the ground with this in mind? What methodologies, what strategies can we envisage? Yeah. And there is, of course, a lot to learn from other countries that have done this, other regions where conflict resolution has been done in very different ways. For example, in the case of Rwanda, they couldn't rely on the criminal justice system and that relies on punitive measures, but really had to go back to traditional forms of conflict management. So really, this idea here is really quite interesting, how PENHA could be very well placed precisely for this, because in a sense we're saying that, to be able to acknowledge the traditional ways of peacemaking and of knowledge system is what we need. So this really mirrors the pastoral way of life, which PENHA has reframed as a form of environmental stewardship. So by valuing these traditional ecological knowledge and empowering communities to manage their resources sustainably while maintaining the cultural identities, can really carve a way to this reconciliation, renovation, and conflict management. And I think really looking at the work of PENHA and having known Zerem now for many years and so on, I think really it's really positioned in this unique position because of the role of facilitation and mediation in peace building efforts in the Horn of Africa. And the reason I say it's very well placed is because of that deep local knowledge and experience, and because, as we heard from Amsale, there's no bias or ethnic affiliation, and that makes it quite well placed for that. It's very well placed because of the focus on these interconnected themes that we've seen. In a sense, these interconnected themes ensure that the efforts address the root causes of conflict, because, as I said, the very themes are entry points for conflict, but also domination and so on, but they're also the entry point for restorative justice. Also, the fact that PENHA prioritizes community engagement, promoting dialogue and participation in decision-making processes, is absolutely crucial for what we need right now. The commitment to gender equality, equally extremely important to carve pathways to more just and sustainable futures. And I would say, the fact that PENHA has cultivated for so many years such strong relationship with various stakeholders, including the local governments, NGOs, academics, and international organizations, really place it in that very important position to become a key actor on dialogue. So in a sense, the provocation is that, like, how do we rise up to this challenge now and foresee the next 35 years? And I would like that, therefore, to open now the floor to questioning or to bringing these to the floor, and to some PENHA staff who can elaborate a little bit more. How do they see us moving forward? And I say us because we are a collective here. It's not just the organization we brought here together because of our connection to PENHA, can really play a role in this and support these the peace building and moving forward through these very important thematic areas, which lead to carve a more sustainable and just future, putting traditional knowledge system at the forefront, and marginalized communities as well, the voices more strongly heard. So if I would like to open to any PENHA staff member who would like perhaps to respond to some of these provocations, and then we also can open up the floor to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rita and Mr. Morton. And I think your last questions, which will be about peace building and conflict resolution, we'll talk about it in the last session. But also just linking to the future direction of PENHA, even from Professor Zeri introduction at the beginning, which shows the livestock being transported to the Middle East, is PENHA is thinking about it, instead of continuing on the traditional way of exporting livestock rather than processed meat and hides, which will add value to the return of cash return to the pastoralist. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who's presented, and I think Rita's just emphasized these two words, restorative justice. The book of Proverbs says, without a vision the people perish. And the vision of PENHA has been a beacon of hope for these last 35 years. I'm sure it will continue to be. And it strikes me that vis-a-vis the last comment from Dr. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your first name, brother. But it's important to research and monitor what is going on, and the strength of PENHA is to step back and say these are the pros and cons, rather than to try and manipulate markets in livestock, it seems to me. And one little thought which is slightly related to strategy, Zeri Mariam mentioned at the beginning of his presentation disappointment in the early years that a centre for excellence wasn't achieved. But he also mentioned mobile schools for the communities you're working with. And I wondered about a mobile extension approach. I mean, we use this in India, where we took a bus converted into a soil testing laboratory around great states of India. It's been used in Canada as an agricultural extension method to improve dairying. A mobile centre that could spend some time each year in each country. I wonder whether that might be a strategy you would consider.
Sorry, any other comments? I mean, maybe I could, I know, John, you didn't want us to talk about the minutiae of livestock markets, but to say a little bit about Dr. Mutal's question. I think it's great to see value being added in country to livestock products, but I think there are also dangers in underestimating the resilience of the more traditional, less formal markets in live animals. I think we've seen some of the smaller operators, particularly in Ethiopia, not only being more resilient to market shocks, but also actually contributing more to the welfare of pastoralists, the initiatives, the voluntary initiatives of some of some livestock marketing companies have actually been greater and more interesting than those of the licensed export abattoirs. So I think we need to look at both halves of that question on livestock marketing.
Thanks for the presentations and the feedback. I think what I want to say is one thing is we have what you call a 5-year strategy, you know. So you would be happy to know that the next strategic review is going to happen early next year, because we have to have another strategy we tend to have 5 years, not 10 years, you know. So these discussions will contribute to that. And the other thing is also, given the conflict in our region, the escalation of conflict, that's the worst about it. You know, when you plan, you have to take into account, will these conflicts, will they escalate, will they slow down? I'm very sorry, there might be more escalation, and particularly given the context in the region, you know, the Middle East and our I mean, at least for me now, in modestly thinking, number one, would PENHA stick to the very original agenda it has in relation to the pastoralist communities as a marginalized group? Do we pursue that way? And I think, as you see already, you can see also we are doing other things, you know. And I think once you spread over thinly, there's also risk. This is what I would like to mention to our trustees. I think the PENHA is very good at certain things, you know, and that's a niche which it had for a long time. And I don't think there's any shame about it, because the challenges are still there. But also in our strategy, maybe we can be more inclusive. What about the peasant farmers who are suffering equally? You know, that's what I think when we started PENHA, the marginalization was a very clear point. You know, everyone was pressing these people, their land was being grabbed, etc., etc. So you have a lot of energy to be radical about it. Oh, can we change these markets, you know, mobility and education, that sort of thing. I think now, as a regional organization, we have to be very careful, because if you spread yourself so thinly, yeah, there is a risk, you know. Do you build on what you have? Certainly, and this kind of pastoral nomadic issues, climate change, of course, peace building. But also in the peace building area, we have done quite a lot discreetly, quietly, you know. You go to the ministries, they happen to be your schoolmates, you know, you have a talk with them. That kind of approach is also another approach, you know. It doesn't have to be public, it doesn't have to be. So in a way, I think we have been good in that sense, although colleagues have been very modest about it. I think the talk and talking, you know, face to face to those ministers, people in power, and you challenge them directly, because in our region, one of the things you don't do is you don't challenge those authorities face to face. You know, by publishing something, you have to talk to them one to one. You know, otherwise you are in trouble. You get arrested next day. So I think this is a strategy was quite important. And then if you work with nomads, also sometimes they consider them as people who are terrorists, you know. Some ministers said that to me. These people are terrorists, you know. Can you believe that? And I had to explain to him for an hour. So please, come on, what's your evidence? You know, it can be done in that way. And I think the Horn is a bit traditional. Things are done in that way. They are not done. Although I have to acknowledge our Kenyan and Ugandan friends. You know, you can put things on paper and a newspaper, criticize the government. In the other countries, you have to be careful. You know, it may not be a very good strategy to go public. You know. Microphone. Okay, sorry. That's good that you missed that bit. So, so I mean, I'm really saying that low key, you know, humble approach is effective. Otherwise, if we spread thinly, and we don't have resources, the money is running out for NGOs. By the way, where are we going to get? I think my colleagues were very good, positive about it. But the reality is, NGO money is drying out. You know, what do we do? I mean, now we do this because of resources, but I'm also afraid that perhaps, you know, focusing on that mission you have from the beginning might be worthwhile revisiting, because it's your strengths. That's where your knowledge is. That's where your connections are. Even all of you who are here, you know, have something to do with that way of life, you know, either through studies, through sympathy. So I would guess, I mean, this is a critical time for PENHA, you know, for us to think about our strategy as an organization, never mind about the next 35 years. Even survive 5 years in our region is going to be quite a job, you know, the way things are going. And what do we do about peace building? I mean, this is really critical. How can we manage it, you know? What do we do? Because as you see, the region is in deep trouble now. Look at Sudan. Look at the Ethiopia-Eritrean relationship. look at Somalia, look at the foreign powers we are involving in our region. What do we do, you know? And many of these powers are uninvited. They're coming to us. We're not going to them, you know? So what do we do? This is, for me, it's a nightmare. Because I think it's just during the liberation wars in the 70s and the 80s, you know, we were optimistic about the better horn. It's going to be great. You know, we're going to cross borders. We got even the PENHA logos. You see it, we didn't have any colonial borders in it. The idea is this is a region we share so much heritage, you know, economy, livelihood, history. So that kind of dream now is probably, you even have to revisit a lot of my own, what's your business here? Where are the different countries? You know, I said, this is a vision, a vision, long-term vision about the region, you know. And nomads don't recognize borders, for goodness sake, you know. So in a way, we have to think about what we do as an organization. Sorry, Ma'tal, I'm getting a bit carried away, but I think we shouldn't lose the focus we have. I think we have a niche. A niche is important, you know. A particular niche where we are good at. Should we sustain that? What do you think? You tell us if you think expanding PENHA and the way you saw it today is a good idea, or if you think that perhaps you guys, you could slow down and you know, focus on certain things. This is really, I would like to be honest and give us your views on that, your impressions. Thank you.
Any responses to these questions raised by Zara Mariam?
My name is Rosalind Reed, and I work in business, business startups here, and I'm looking to develop more business startup programs in Africa and the Caribbean, particularly amongst the young. So I think two things that I wanted to ask, maybe a reflection, that for PENHA, you know, how are you going to, you got 35 years of expertise, knowledge and experience. How can you use that or leverage that to share amongst other nations around the world, particularly maybe regions like South America, with all the knowledge and understanding that you've gained? And that could be a money generation activity that's going to help you to support you long term. And what's your legacy? How are you bringing young people to carry on the work that you've done so far?
Consolidation is a very important phase of strategic planning. So it is important to recognize your heritage and not lose it by charging off in too many directions. It's tempting when an organization gets to 35 to do that, but I don't get the sense that you are doing that. I think the developments that we've heard on the video have been very constructive ones, but consolidation's a very important word. And entrepreneurship, which is what our sister here is just talking about. And entrepreneurship is, I'm very encouraged actually to meet some of the younger people in this very room who are associated with PENHA. So I think you are looking to the future, and may you continue to do so. Thank you.
We know that PENHA and the pastoralists are specialists in resilience. And if we look at our region now with conflict, because I'm interested in refugee and migration studies, we have a lot of refugees that are losing the resilience in that respect because they come from cities and other places. And is there a way that PENHA can lead in teaching as specialists or involving in adapting the resilience that has been learned from pastoralists to the refugee in that area?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Champion, Photo Aid and various bits and bobs. I've travelled and seen and documented some of the amazing work and met the fantastic women and all the projects that you're engaged in sort of firsthand, kind of coming at it from a completely left field kind of independent sort of view, and it's phenomenal. And I've been following, and obviously I know Zeri, and Zeri keeps collaring me and giving me updates, and this has been amazing. I mean, honestly, phenomenal stories here. I was just, because my head's media, that's what I do. But I was just thinking, I don't know, because of all that's going on with like climate change and, you know, obviously the peace and the resilience and everything that you've been talking about, it seems to me like there's stories that you could share with the media in some way, and obviously I don't know if you have a PR company, but if you can maybe team up with somebody to do PR, I think that would generate cash for you. So this is kind of like practical kind of thing I'm saying, I suppose, more than anything. But I think you have so much value to give, and it just might be something to just put into the business mix when you're looking for the next 5 years, particularly now when we're trying to accelerate communication of climate mitigation. So that's kind
of. Thank you very much, Vanessa, and I hope the PENHA crew will take notice of that. I think it's a very useful recommendation. Okay, well I'll say make a few more points. Vanessa mentioned climate change. It featured in the presentation, but maybe not as a big headline. And obviously people in this room are very concerned about conflict, but we have to be very concerned about climate change as well. The projections for the lowland Horn of Africa are for a drier climate, for increased drought, increased unpredictability of rainfall. The projections for the highland part of East Africa are actually for a wetter climate, but also a more unpredictable rainfall. A different apportionment of rainfall across the year, differences in the rainy seasons, and increased likelihood of floods, which is going to impact on lowlands and pastoral communities. And in addition, we have further threats that we're only beginning to think about. In 2016, Cyclone Saga was, I believe, the first tropical storm ever to make landfall in the Horn of Africa. It caused fatalities in both Somalia and Ethiopia. The general projections seem to be for increased cyclone activity in the Indian Ocean, and the northern Indian Ocean in particular. So that's yet another thing to add into the mix. It's in terms of climate change where we're dealing not only with the known unknowns around rainfall projections, but unknown unknowns like increased tropical storms. So I think that this is a very important area of uncertainty we have to think about. There have been lots of questions which we're not attempting to answer. I'm maybe going to leave two more here with you. The first is on how PENHA influences policy. I mean, we've seen these very impressive publications. When I say glossy, I'm in no way meaning that in a pejorative way. I think it's important that these are well produced and attractive, but I think we all need to think about exactly how that knowledge that's embodied in those publications gets into policy and into public discussion. It's not just by waving things at ministers or policymakers. There are a whole gamut, broad spectrum of ways in which you can influence policy, and I think it's be worth thinking more about that. And the second, which really goes on from that, is how PENHA positions itself vis-a-vis governments. I think Zere has hinted at some governments being more amenable to progressive policies and public voices than others. But PENHA obviously wants to work with governments. The Dryland Restoration Programme document, a policy document that was shown, is a good example of working with government agencies. But how does PENHA think of itself vis-a-vis government, as an advocate or as an honest broker or as a more engaged partner doing some of the work actually with government? I think these are important questions which I think should be reflected upon. But really, having made those 3 points, I would just like again to congratulate the teams on the ground in PENHA. I think when Rita asked, how will PENHA survive, this was not sort of how will PENHA survive. This was, how will PENHA survive? Because I think it will. I think as long as there is a need for it, and that looks like being indefinite, you know, that we can continue working as PENHA, as friends of PENHA, to help pastoralists in the Horn to sustainable and dignified livelihoods. With that, I think I'll leave everybody to go to the refreshment break 3 minutes early according to the clock, and thank you all those who answered the questions, and looking forward to resuming the discussion after a short break.
Thank you very much for those lovely refreshments. Chocolate biscuits are always popular with me. This session is all about communication. And there are two opportunities I want to mention. I've got the permission of the founder to mention these before we start. One is that in September next year, the Africa Farm Management Association, which is about the same age as PENHA, is holding its congress that it holds every other year. It's going to be in Rwanda. It's an opportunity to present papers. So I want to challenge people here. Maybe you want to communicate your research or your current development activities. It's a very practical sort of organization and a good place to show your face and get involved with. The second thing is the Tropical Agriculture Association International, of which I was the chairman until 2 years ago. I'm still involved as a member, was a fellow actually, but John Morton, Professor John Morton, gave one of our lectures there. We are about, well, it depends where you start, either 102 years old or 45 years old. But we have a journal called Agriculture for Development, and Zeri has produced a paper in there, and it will be another opportunity and membership. Have a look at the website, www.taai.org. So we've got an international membership, and it would be lovely to have new members. And it's an opportunity, a place where I'd like to see PENHA's name further aired. Now, we're here to actually celebrate the launching of this book. And it's focusing mainly on Ethiopia, but Africa as a whole has about 268 million pastoralists. Ethiopia reckons about 12% of its population are pastoralists or agro-pastoralists, semi-sedentary, semi-farming pastoralists. And this is based on a study which was funded through the Ethiopian government, and it's all about social protection schemes in various parts of the Horn of Africa, but particularly based in Ethiopia. And those of us who are of an ancient birth date, like me, remember the 70s and 80s food for work schemes. There are various approaches of providing vouchers for different activities which are beneficial towards the goal. And our friends here are going to talk about this book, but the good news is, and the reason I'm waving it, I've already got a copy. I'm going to return this to the bookstall outside, and for a mere £20, you can get your own copy. And I guarantee it will send you to sleep in no time, because I was the reviewer of this book. But it's a really good book. But it's written by 17 professional authors, specialists, and it should be read chapter by chapter. It's not a sort of book you read at a sitting. It's not meant to be. I hope you agree with that. So it's to be read and digested and appreciated. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over. I think, Zeri, you're going to speak first. Is that right?
This better. Yes. Okay. Well, when I'm sitting here next to my old teacher, I get a bit scared. I remember he was my teacher long time ago at the Royal Agricultural College. So whenever I see him, I just tremble. My teacher. May I also correct my dear teacher now on a couple of things. Number one is this study was funded by the Dutch. The Dutch like us a lot, They like this Horn of Africa idea, Greater Horn, So they and also interested genuinely on this marginalized communities, and therefore I would like to credit that the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research. This is the research funded by them. And the Ethiopia connection is very important because Ethiopia has one of the largest social protection programs in the continent, funded by the World Bank. Correct me, those who know about Ethiopia. I think the World Bank was funding that PCMP, what we call Productive Safety Net Program, for many years. So it's one of the. So I would like to correct my dear guru, you know, which is a shame for me to do that, but I have to do that. Sorry, I mean it implied that the Ethiopian government funded. That's why I'm reacting. I mean that's why I'm trying to correct. You know, it's very important correction. So politically, it's very important connection. He put me in trouble. I wish our government could fund the research, but I don't think. So, as you can see, the 4 institutions on the cover. One is at the Grat University in the Tigray region, and then we have the Development Planning Unit, UCL, where I worked for many years, and then Samara University. This is one of the pastoralist institutions, university in the land of the Afar, and then PENHA. So those are the 4 partners, institutional partners, as far as the study goes. But we say a bit more in detail in a minute. There are also others, Addis Ababa University and others I'm going to mention in a minute. So when you, and my colleague Barakat is one of the authors, so what I'll try to do now is just to give you a bit of a feel of what the bit of the background, you know, about the book. Microphone, yes. The background to the study, and the reason why we focus on the Afar pastoralist peoples is because we want to see the impact of the social protection program, particularly on the nomadic and pastoralist community. That was our interest. Did it have an impact positively or negatively? And we concentrate on the Afar because they are one of the marginalized communities in the Horn generally, and also in Ethiopia. They're a cross-border group on both the Eritrean and the Ethiopian side. So we're particularly interested looking at the impact of social protection program, what we call the PCMP. Was it, you know, productive? Was it useful to them? How did it work, etc., etc. So I'll say something about that, and then how it started. Why do we choose the Afar, as I said, the safety net, and there is a reason. Then sum up the main findings of the research, because the book was based on the research we did, you know. We developed the research reports, the advocacy, to a book like this. We brought authors from various institutions. And then the evolution itself, why did we turn the research paper into a book? And the rationale behind that, because it'd be a shame to have done the research and not publish it. I mean, we are motivated to publish it as a book and have it available more widely. That's really and then I think I want to skip the regional bit, which the map is there. You can forget that. Let's move forward. I must like that map, you know. It's a good map, ecological map, political as well as ecological. So the productive safeness in Ethiopia started we call it PCMP in 2005 in the highland regions, and that's why we had this logic of looking at how did it impact on the lowland pastoral areas. That's really our interest, you know, to see the gap. And in the case of Ethiopia, it covered up to 10 million across many of the regions in the country, and although it started earlier in the highland areas, I think in the lowland pastoral regions, in the Somali region and the Afar region, it started a bit late. I think it's a few years late because of the implementation and the need to organize it in a certain way. Then I think what we wanted to do was we want to take up the Afar as a case, the region of the pastoral. This is one of the remote areas, one of the marginalized parts of the country, where the benefits of the social protection program did not have a major impact. So in a way, we want to have a critical discussion around that. Why is it that in some of the highland areas, the productive safety net was effective impactful. You can measure that when we compare some of the highland areas. But what happened in the one of the fundamental things we found, and this is, we criticize ourselves as sedentary. I think that it was designed around people who thought of a sedentary way of life, So it did not accommodate the sort of mobility, the flexibility, which are very important in the pastoral areas. So we looked at why is it, why was it not designed according to the concept of mobility and inclusion as well, because those particular groups, have particular contexts. And so we looked at, and then we also thought that we want to engage with a number of Ethiopia at that time had such an emerging institution, it's universities in many parts of the country, So there's an attraction that you can work with those universities at the local level. It's an opportunity. One of those universities was the Samara University in the Afar region itself, was the first one, So we decided to look at to work in partnership. So what we're trying to do is we got two universities, which are at the Grat University and at Addis Ababa University, which is also well established, and then the Samara University in Afar region, and UCL, of course, I was represented by, because I've been working with UCL. So the key objectives at the time were really that we want to evaluate the effectiveness of this program. How effective is it in terms of its impact on poverty reduction, food security, and livelihood in the Afar region? We're critically looking at it. And then also to investigate whether this implementation in the Afar area, be it on a delayed fashion, how did it secure in any food insecurity efforts, and also poverty reduction, its impact on poverty reduction. To try to understand and evaluate whether the nomadism or pastoralism actually has institutions, social institutions within the community, who could be incorporated in the livelihood, in the PCMP and Afar, because they have their way of surviving as well. This government intervention in any way include the survival strategies of these communities, for example. That was one of our inquiry. And also to assess the extreme weather conditions, because in the lowland Afar region is the environment. If you want to have a taste of hell, you should go there. I was talking about 50 centigrade of climate, so hot, becomes impossible. We used to work there, so I have some experience. The highland areas are probably much more comfortable. So the PCMP, in fact, did not take into account the seasonality of the weather, for example, and then if you go to the Afar region itself very briefly, this is the Afar region. It shows you how scattered it is. 270,000 square kilometers, thinly populated, with a population of 1.5 million, scattered over this wide area. Mind you, the place is also rich with potassium and other mineral resources, and that could be also part of the problem, because this place, the area is being grabbed by various investors, so that they can exploit. And my story is, I have seen the Afar themselves being employees of those companies in those areas, abandoning pastoralism, because they clearly saw an advantage in doing that. So the other thing is that environment, as I said, you can see the seasonal mobility and how harsh it is. I'll give you some idea. And then I want to show you some more pictures. Pictures are important sometimes. They say more than talking, So these are the very interesting, what you'd call Morani in his herders, like in some parts of East Africa. These are the Afar youngsters, traditional. You got the AK as well, self-protection. You buy, sell a camel and buy weapons. But when I talked to them, this was interesting. The older guys like this aspire at pastoralism as being a viable way of life, They defend it. It's their culture. And when I was talking to these little kids who were walking for a good 3-4 kilometers to go to school, an aeroplane was flying over us, when I just to talk, and then I asked them, what do you want to be? Most of them said, I would like to become a pilot, So it's a lot of aspirational attitudes among these communities, which we don't appreciate sometimes, We need to study the aspirations of the different groups of the generation, like these kids, you know. So in a way they were saying, oh, I would like to be a pilot, you know, I want to be. So this is the assumption we had, is they would like to be camel owners. So this is what I was coming from, you know. I thought they would say to me, oh, I want to own 10 camels. So they said, no, I would like to be pilots, you know. So I think we need to take this into the aspirational part of it. And the PRA was very effective. I mean, we had women involved to do the study, the field work. And then once we have done that, I can now sum up the main findings and the key limitations. Okay, the PCMP, the Productive Safety Net Program, is seasonally determined, you know. But the problem then is the season for the pastoralists and the farmers is different. For example, if you take the highlands, you know, the rainy season is between May, June, July time, you know. In the pastoral areas could be a different season. So the PCMP activities were sort of tailored around highland perception of the season, not in the lowland, you know, the kind of, for example, the seasonality. Afar environment becomes impossible to survive in during the months of the summer, what we call summer. June, July, August, September, it becomes so hot, and it's impossible to do anything. So the seasonality, we found that was for the productive safety net was tailored towards highland farmers, and the January, June being the time where you can support the farmers to get ready for the farming season, which is July, August, September, you know. So that's what I'm trying to say. Seasonality was an issue, and obviously I'm repeating myself, but in general, the social protection safety net was not tailored to this population. For example, public works, you know, for the farmers is good. They have a tradition, farming tradition, so they take up those kind of irrigation and other activities which are suited in highland conditions, because the farmers have some experience. In the lowland areas, perhaps, you know, you have to think differently. The priorities may be different. Conservation tools they were provided to these pastoralist communities, but they are not familiar with farming, you know, so why do you give them those tools? You know, you're probably the wrong tools. And then the sustainability of their food, for example, it doesn't complement the food aid they were getting. It doesn't complement in helping to build their own assets, you know, as pastoralists. Our PRA findings indicate that there are multiple factors which curtail for realization of the program, because there was not tailored. As I said before, I think the conceptualization of this program was a key issue. It was designed for sedentary, wherever they are, highland or lowland areas, which does not fit into the pattern of the Afar. That was really our main. Economic diversification among the Afar is grown significantly. And the PCMP program did not take into account the diversification of economy among the Afar, because, as I said, some of them have now become urban traders, others has become, you know, merchants, whatever. So those were our. Now, how did we use the outcomes? We had 3 levels of it. Firstly, when we finished the studies, we produced. To be fair to the partners, we produced short reports with the fear of sharing them at the Grat University, was a partner institution, but also, more importantly, the Afar themselves, Samara University. So that was the knowledge sharing part of it. And then also to use the same information to gather politicians, parliamentarians, and to share our findings at that level, you know, the government level, because there were a good number of MPs who are keen to learn what has happened to this program. So we managed to do that. And then once we finished the study, having engaged with policymakers at federal level, community level, we also have to give something back to the Afars themselves. We had local meetings in the settlements, you know. This was only a matter of duty. It's not a favor. And then thank them for all their help. So now I'm finishing now before John asks me to stop talking. Now Now this is the bigger dream, and Barakat has to say more about this. What we had all that study done, you know, the publicity, etc. And now we said, what do we do this? What's the point of all this research unless we are able to document it and learn some lessons, draw some lessons for Africa, for sub-Saharan Africa, based on the Ethiopian experience, because this was one of the largest programs. So obviously there were lessons, and we were committed enough, and nobody was funding us. So we mobilized a good number of researchers who are not directly involved in the field research, but people who have knowledge about social protection from the other universities, for example, Addis Ababa University and others. We brought in 11 authors, and I'm happy to say we are all 98% were from the region. Is that okay to say? How is it? Indigeneity? Our own. Yes. I wanted to confirm it. Anyway, seriously, I mean, this was a deliberate plan. We want to have it our own. Okay, we don't mind the editing bit here and there, but actually the ownership of it. But English is not our mother tongue, so sometimes we have difficulties with it. So, but the ownership of the whole thing. But having said that, we are so grateful to two friends. Our real dear friend Nicole Kenton, who worked with the IID for many years. Her daughter is here. Whether she is here, she was one of the key authors as well, and basically all the other. John of course is also John Morton, John Livingston, the Ugandan. He was one of the authors. He was all from the region. I'm happy to say that because it's also been quite an experience building to work together with institutions at various levels, the government, and also to think of a sub-Saharan context. So therefore, now what we did, we widened the scope of the book, not only to cover Ethiopia, but look at other experiences. And then we started to think what is the value of this. In fact, in terms of value addition, the research has a multidisciplinary approach to the whole thing. We are not looking at from a social but from various angles, economic, social, policy aspects. And that we could say the team composition is important because we did a great deal of literature review from other countries, when we put this together. So it was not simply based on the Ethiopian experience, but it drew from other sub-Saharan contexts as well. And also I think I have to add that the interactions, we stress the highland-lowland interactions because sometimes, as you know, many of you, in the Horn, there is a very close interaction between lowland communities and highland. This is not recognized. So in our case, having done this study, we recognize, for instance, the Tigrayan highland farmers are closely connected with the Afar in these lowland areas. You could say the same about the other parts of the country. So that was not a rocket science, but we realized that this highland-lowland interaction should be appreciated because people exchange goods and services, and etc., although they may be culturally very different. COVID is an issue. We looked at it. There is a chapter on COVID because we cannot avoid that. Now, to conclude, really, I would like to say the authors also recognize within the social protection there is lack of understanding of the informal social protection within these communities. There was an assumption that thought of that, and we dug deep into that and say, oh my God, the informal systems of social protection should be valued highly, and then we try to include elements in our critique, if you like, in this book. Also, we recognize the women and youth, are marginalized still in these communities. We are not in the community we came across, and this is also true, by the way. The marginalization of youth and women is also very true in the highland areas. This is a sort of Abrahamic context. So I think we have to understand it in that. So it's not necessarily that the marginalization is only for the women in the highlands. It's a cultural thing which is very deeply rooted for centuries. So we have to appreciate. And lastly, we are also warning that this hegemony against the lowlanders, that there are people kind of with difficulties, far from the truth. In fact, economically they contribute positively to our economies. So where is this misconception coming from? I mean, for not being farmers. In fact, they have doing something alternative to the farming system itself. So in a way, we acknowledge that. We give it a lot of credit as an economy, as a way of life as well. On that note, I'm done. Before John has got me, and I think I'm just.
Give the man a clap. Thank you. Yes, I mean, you touched on a very big issue there. This book has strengthened the recognition that social protection programs are a good thing, and it does lead into other parts of Africa particularly. But the question is, will the resources be there to fund them in future? And we come back to our friend with her entrepreneurship in London here and elsewhere. And the book review that I wrote for this appeared in Agriculture for Development, where also Zeri wrote a paper about this work. And where also Dr. Christy Peacock, some of you might know Christy Peacock, who used to run Farm Africa, but she started 11 years ago now, SIDAI, which is a local company in East Africa providing veterinary products for livestock producers. And it struck me as I read this that there needs to be more scope for public-private partnerships and engaging the local people in their values and their entrepreneurship. So that might be something we bring out in the discussion. But unless there's a burning question on the specifics of what Zeri has shared, I'm going to pass over to Bereket, who's going to share his details. Okay?
Thank you, John. So it's my pleasure to present my presentation today about social protection, especially with the focus of Sub-Saharan Africa. So initially, this project was mainly for Ethiopia. However, we were saying, let's explore what's going on in the other parts of Africa. So we were trying to see from Mali, Sudan, and also Kenya and southern part of Africa. So we're trying to really learn something from the ongoing interventions at that time. So this chapter came in because of that. So this presentation is based upon the first chapter as well as the 8th chapter of the book, which mainly try to really frame the whole agenda of social protection. So at the beginning, we are going to look at the overview, what's social protection, what kind of interventions are there, the nature of safety net especially, what kind of nexus approach we developed for the research, and also we are going to look what is going to be the trend in the pattern in relation to the safety net across the continent. So basically the first question comes, why social protection? So it is really an avoidable intervention wherever we go. Here in the UK we have a kind of social security. So similarly we have many interventions in Latin America and in Africa as well. So we can look at the level of intervention, but basically there is a need for intervention to support communities because their resilience capacity becomes weak, and then there should be a kind of response. So this new trend of intervention is becoming very common. Instead of just being reactive, we need to be proactive. We need to have a system, institutional and policy systems in place instead of just running after droughts and famine across the Horn of Africa or across Africa. So this is the whole agenda. Instead of just waiting to happen a disaster and react, better to have a system that can really be well prepared and full-fledged to cope with this kind of disasters. So this is the whole agenda. However, sometimes governments also use safety net approaches for gaining political capital. For instance, during the election times in Ethiopia, for instance, the government tried to distribute fertilizers to really gain the support from the farmers. So in Uganda, the same, some kind of interventions there as well. So there are targeted interventions to gain political support, but mainly because of their political agenda. The another is just some development partners trying to really encourage this kind of intervention, saying that we have got this kind of fund, can you really have an intervention that focus on safety net? this happened in Ethiopia as well. When the Ethiopian PSMB started, one of the interviews said that at that time Ethiopia had not good relationship with the West because of the human rights abuses at that time, and the West were refusing to support their budgetary funding system, saying that we cannot really give you fund in cash or in terms of budgetary support. Rather, let's develop some kind of intervention where they can really support in terms of food aid or other kind of interventions. So it could be a kind of homegrown approach, or it could be like an induced program from the West or from the other international development partners. This could be another one. The another intervention could be because of trying to minimize or reduce the gap in inequalities. So governments could also have some kind of long-term approach to the program. In general, we have broadly three kinds of social protection interventions. The first one is consolidated one, which is more of long-term focused with solid institutional capacity and also funding mechanism for that. So this more commonly we can see in the West countries. The another one is the emerging social protection. This is really common among the Latin America countries, especially if you look the before its abolition in Mexico, the Prospera. It was one of the well-known programs across the continent. So we have this kind of interventions as well as a kind of emerging, but having some kind of solidified approach towards safety net. With limited kind of social protection, Ethiopia has mentioned it now, but I believe after having 20 years of experience on this field, I believe Ethiopia could be also on the emerging social protection by now, but I don't see any kind of defining situation to put Ethiopia in that kind of context. But limited in a sense that there is a growing approach toward the safety net, but still it's not really a full-fledged one. In terms of framing the agenda of safety net especially, some countries look at it as a kind of human rights approach. So for instance, Mozambique, it has got in its constitution that every Mozambican has the right to access to this kind of safety nets. So some of them are really supported by legal foundations. The another one is just national development approach. To put, if you are trying to support a family, so you need to link it to the national development, how it can really have multifaceted impact at the global or national level. So this is another approach to that as well. So it can be given as a kind of responsive, but in the context of Ethiopia and now, we can see a kind of regular. This support is continuing for 6 months. So now families are aware that in the next 6 months they have some kind of government support coming in. So they are really well planned in terms of the expectation of the resources to come to the family. So it can be given in cash, in food, in kind of subsidies, vouchers, insurance, also other public works, for instance. It has got really a number of instruments to implement safety net. Some communities in Ethiopia, for instance, they said refused cash. They said we don't need cash to the government, saying that because they believe that cash can be volatile, it can really reduce its purchasing power. So they prefer cash. The Afars, for instance, they said no for cash. So they have their own understanding of getting support. It could be conditional or unconditional. Conditional in a sense that you need to provide some kind of contribution to the program so that you can get the support. For instance, you need to send a child to the school and the government can support you. You need to have your child get vaccinated and then you can have the support. In unconditional situations, it's like across the border it could be because of disasters. Sometimes it could be because lactating women, because of disability, families can have a long-term unconditional support. This another one is the traditional and contemporary safety nets. The contemporary one, we are talking about this government big multi-million large-scale social assistance. We are talking about PSMP. But traditional one, families can really support each other during difficult times, because of the drought, because of the famine. A single family can support another family by providing or restocking their livestock assets. So it could be also another one. But the modern or contemporary safety net approaches, we witness that to miss this kind of very important indigenous knowledge systems in terms of supporting the communities. The another one is just when you are supporting a family, it cannot be really supporting a family. You are supporting the community, the whole nation. So there is always a link between a single family, supporting a single family, and also looking at the national development goals as well as SDGs. So it's very interlinked. The another one in terms of PSMP, we are talking about PSMP because one of the biggest interventions in Africa, supported by World Bank, USAID, Defeat, and others. So it's really one of the biggest one. Yeah. So you can see it has been progressing for the last 20 years, 2 decades. So they have really ample experience now, especially with our contribution towards this program, with a niche of looking at pastoral communities. I can see it's really progressing a lot. So now in its fifth phase, now in this last one especially, there is an emphasis to include urban areas as part of the program. The focus was on rural areas. Now it's really also moving to urban areas. So there is always an expanding nature of this intervention. There is another thing that we observed in the Ethiopian case was that there is a lack of coherence among a number of interventionists. We see PSMP1, there is HARP that supports households with asset building. There is another emergency relief, school feed, and also other kind of interventionists. But we really didn't see some kind of convergence in terms of their impact on households and the community or at the national level. So that's what we look at, a kind of missing link in terms of really bringing all these interventionists into one and trying to understand their impact. On this research, we developed this framework that's called Pastoralism, Resilience and Social Protection, PRSP, because we want to see this whole agenda from the point of nexus, looking at what are the key elements or factors to really have a long-term impact on the policy agenda in Ethiopia and across the region. So the first one is actors, institutions, and policy design. That is really, when you are thinking about safety nets, we need to think about institutions. We cannot really deliver this one in a vacuum. We need to have very effective institutions that are ready to respond as well as ready to address the long-term ambition of the National Development Plan. So we need also to learn about having how institutions can have a synergy and learning process. Recently, I was in Lesotho, southern part of Africa, to do a consultancy work for IOM with my friend Yosef. So when we were asking them about this safety net in Lesotho, they were saying we learned a lot about safety net from Ethiopia's experience about how to use work as a kind of safety net. So it was really good, to share experiences, to share policy transfers among these countries. The another agenda for this intervention really what is making challenging is affordability. Now the Ethiopian government is now contributing about 14% of the program. The 86% is funded by the global development partners. But once they withdraw from this kind of program, what will happen? Can the Ethiopian government sustain this kind of support to the communities? So the affordability issue is really there as a kind of very vexing issue in this agenda. In one of the southern part of Africa, one of the countries asked for further support. They said, the donors said, sorry, we don't have further support, we don't have further budget, you need to run by your own. And the country remains stuck there. So affordability is really one to look at to this problem. Another one is performance and result. We have been looking at the overall program impacts and results, but we don't see really any kind of unit-based performance assessment, in a sense that we need really to have a profile for a family. If we are support this family for some time, we need to really understand what's really improving, what's not improving. So instead of just at program level, we need to have really a family level performance assessment, because I will mention later on, but in Afar, some of the families have been really on safety net for more than 10 years. So this kind of intervention usually is made to really lift them up from the poverty and then capacitate them, especially the name says productive. We have really the productive element on that kind of program. So we need really understand this kind of performance assessment should really look at household level to see the progress made in every family and household. The last element is the technological advancement. There is a potential to expand and use technological advancement to use in safety nets, especially in Ethiopia. And yeah, so the technological advancement can really assist this program in many ways. Especially the e-payment or e-cash is very important. Within seconds, you can really give a family a cash through this kind of transfers. So technological advancement can really be the future of this program. Ethiopia has started this Telebir about 2-3 years ago. So it's now in its trial phase, but in other parts of Africa like Kenya and Tanzania, other parts, we have the M-Pesa, which is really there for a long time. And in Lesotho, I also observed the NISA is like a national information system for safety net and social protection. So families are already on the system. So if there is a disaster or something is happening, it's very easily to trace and then to intervene and support families. So we try to use this kind of framework to in our book so that we can have really an understanding what's going on and what would be also its contribution towards the national development agenda. So in brief, just to see some of the impacts, we can see some of the programs supported the coping mechanism of a family, especially in terms of survival rate, by providing food and improving the consumption smoothing rule or family food level. So this enabled the programs to save lives at least, though we are a bit questioning about their productive elements. However, the center has been on food security, providing food aid. Food aid is like a kind of dead aid, like Dambisa Moyo said. So it's old-fashioned. So we need really to complement food aid with other kind of elements where a family can thrive and also survive and also be out of poverty and support their family members. Yeah, so, and also in terms of intervention, the focus has been on household and family. So there was no any kind of special intervention for use, particularly in terms of the family nutritional value as well. We provide food, but we don't really trace how much nutritional value or impact this brought to the family. So finally, I was trying to really entertain the idea what will happen in the future. So like I mentioned, the digital services can also promote for financial inclusion. That's very important. So this kind of programs in Sub-Saharan Africa can use this kind of technology for smooth and efficient and effective delivery of the programs. So the question is also another one is ownership. Who owns the program? The governments or the development partners or other development countries, development partner countries? So this is another also a question, the ownership question. The trend is also consolidation and systemization of the program. In many ways, in many countries now, you see instead of just as a program, as a kind of solid intervention among the public service system. So the idea should now focus on long term. We need really to live about this short-termism or short-term intervention. We need really to look at the long-term impacts of this kind of interventions. Like I mentioned earlier, it's also important to have alternative source of income to support this kind of intervention, instead of just providing all food aid to the families. And finally, the point is just about how we can really share knowledge and learning across the continent. That's very important. So this book is part of that initiative on social protection agenda. Finally, looking at this book, it was really a very nice journey for me to be involved in this work. Also, like Dr. Zara mentioned, that it was really produced by the researchers from the Horn. Most of them from the Horn, so it's really important. And the knowledge cooperation was very important as well. So we work across the local, regional, international levels to really produce a very influential policy intervention in Ethiopia and across the region. My only concern is about the colonization of knowledge. This book is really very expensive. It used to be 130 pounds or something for the hard copy. And the publisher said, we can only produce hard copy for 2 years. Sorry, we are not really critical about this kind of deals, no? So they kept for 2 years only hard copy, which was being sold about more than 100 pounds. The idea of this book is for supporting the social protection agenda policy in Africa. So who can really afford this kind of money in Africa, even in the UK? Maybe some people may afford, maybe libraries can afford, but individuals cannot really afford. So sometimes I doubt myself where, I mean, the intention to support African policymaking is there because of this kind of hardness. Finally, we negotiate with the publisher. We got this book on paper-based, about 17, 18 pounds. It's after long negotiation with them. So that was one thing we tried to do to reduce the cost. But now online, even it's like about 30 pound online to be sold. So it's now we are selling 20 pound this book at the moment. So I prefer these publishers to consider Africa and African researchers and status, and to provide least cost books so that the knowledge generated from that region also can benefit the people and then the communities as well, the policymakers in that region as well. Thank you so much for listening.
Just specifically on this last point, I mean, one fault for the PENHA trustees is, in the same way that you might have a bursary fund to assist volunteers, you could have a fund to subsidize the availability of certain publications. I don't know, it's a thought. Both of you have conveyed to us your passion for this work, and thank you for that. This is not just an academic treatise. This is people who really believe in helping the cause. And you've both touched on what we've probably all seen in development in some of the poorest countries, the incredible support networks that exist, especially in rural communities. The trouble is, once you introduce a government venture with loads of money, with a finite period, people say, oh, we can relax, we don't need to do this anymore. And if you're not careful, you can destroy the local system. So what's your response to that, and how can your work together with others to try and have an integrated system, which Bereket's just been talking about? How can you address that?
Yeah. So I mean, this question is very critical. We see in Africa having many interventions. Safety net is one of them. Health intervention, educational programs, capacity building, environmental programs, nowadays climate change related programs, climate mobility nowadays. So these are the questions that we need also to ask critically, looking at how these kind of programs can be part of the national agenda and also part of the national policy as well as budgetary system, to have a kind of consolidated approach to interventions. Instead of just focusing on one intervention, there should be at national level that to see how each program and the intervention can really add up and contribute towards the development of the country. So this is a very important question. I think we need to work more on institutions, policies, capacities, and also sharing knowledge and practices among these countries and institutions. Thank you.
Have you come across cases in your wider research where people have got X amount of support in year one, 3/4 of X in year two, and in other words, tailing off, so that they move from dependence to independence in that way?
Thank you, John. There is a process called graduation. We don't have only graduation at universities. We have graduation also on safety nets. So they say it at some kind of level, they say, okay, now you are able to support your own family, so you are graduated from this program. But sometimes there is a kind of situation where you graduate the family and then they come back as well to the program. If it's not really supported for long term, ensures that they can really support themselves. So there is a way they use graduation, but I'm really critical of this graduation approach as well. Better really support families, but ensure that they shouldn't really come back again to the program, rather than graduating them, saying that we graduated the 50,000 families, and then some of them they come back. So we should really sustain the support so that they don't really come back again to this kind of poverty trap.
Thank you. Right, sir. Yes, please give your name.
I think you do. So my name is James Firebrace. No, I had a question to generalize this discussion, and perhaps link it back to the earlier discussion about trends and so on. So I'll start with a comment, which is what I saw in Somaliland during the big droughts, 2016-17, and then again 5 years later. And obviously, I think the comment was made by John Morton that this is an increasing trend of increasingly severe and lengthy droughts. So what I saw happening in a country that hasn't got an official mega safety net like in Ethiopia was a rather differential impact on pastoralists. The larger herd owners got through one way or the other, but the smaller ones didn't. They fell off the end of the system. They ended up in either IDP camps or in urban areas. And then they had two systems of support. One was traditional, as you mentioned, families and so on nearby, but also the diaspora, which I think is a big factor in the Somaliland system. And of course, many of them ended up in IDP camps and had to survive on donor aid, emergency donor aid in this case, and slowly drifted out of them. So I'm just wondering if this may be a future area for PENHA, of course, but I wonder if you can comment on countries that haven't got, is my analysis correct, more widely than Somaliland, and B, I guess what is the future for these safety nets, big programs outside of Ethiopia, which is the most developed?
Ethiopia has been the center of excellence actually in this program development. So Somaliland politicians have been going to Ethiopia to learn and gain experience from these big programs. You're right. I mean, the program by itself is still learning from its intervention. There are also issues that whether these programs are inclusive enough or not. Like you said, people in IDPs, refugees, whether refugees are part of this program or these are mainly to the citizens of these countries only. So in terms of intervention, in terms of target group, still is the program has been learning, expanding, like I said, from rural areas to urban areas. Rural poor people in urban areas were forgotten at the beginning. Initially, like the Dr. Dara said, this program started in highlands for the farmers, and then after 4 years, in 2005, it started in urban areas, and later on it's expanded to rural areas, to the pastoralists. Now it moved to urban areas as well now. So it's like expanding from time to time, but always we really ask mobility. People with mobile style of livelihoods should be supported, you know. If we are trying to deliver food for farmers, it's okay. They are settled in one place, you can reach them at any time. But if the families are moving from one place to another place, how can you deliver food aid to them? So there is a way to do it, but we need really to mind always about mobility, human mobility, especially now with climate mobility in focus, which is affecting communities as well as especially pastoralists. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Professor Frey to say a few words very briefly before Big Ben strikes 4 o'clock. It's just up the road, we might hear it, but I don't want to shorten the next session.
Just very briefly at what James was saying, in context of the region, and this is why we keep on and on about stability and reconciliation and, you know, normality. I'm very sorry to say that our region has had some normality, some stability, and then back to that. I think that viciousness, and in a way, as we said earlier, we have been focused on pastoralists for many, many years. And strategically, we are saying, what do we do next? You know, because I think that stability. I mean, okay, the PSMP was developed in a certain context, maybe in terms of stability and other issues. So I think now the challenge we have in the region, I'm very sorry to say that unless this region is stabilized, you know, and ordinary people go back to normal life, that they always done that, you know. I think my fear is this shift and the instability of the region, both political and social turbulence, is, I don't know, sometimes, you know, you wonder how you're going to plan in this situation, you know. And then emergency becomes an issue, unfortunately. Before, I remember when we took some of our students overseas at UCL, I always pushed our department to be close to our region, you know. I did a lot of, well, we are a good region, we are good, you know, he knows where is Cuba, you know. I mean, I used a bit of propaganda for my region, you know. I got, we have long civilization, was this and that and that. And then we were going to Ethiopia, and this is students, you know, Japanese and others. I asked them to read some stuff, you know, some background. All they came back was with just the Bob Geldof story, you know, Do They Know It's Christmas? And I said to them, come on, for goodness sake, you know, that's a long time ago. The country is moving forward. And, you know, this is really the stigmatization, which I find it very painful, honestly speaking. And I think unless, and look at the Sudan now, it's heartbreaking, you know. How are you going to think about development intervention in that kind of situation? The country is practically, the two armies are about to eat it up alive, you know. And the other countries, I'm also worried, you know. I mean, the fragility, the political squabbles, some of them are nonsense, you know. People could sit down and talk. And I think this is I would say, in the next 5 years, if we can find peace and stability in our region, we can move forward. But the way the status quo goes at the moment is hard, you know. And maybe the story we're talking about is even probably, I mean, the whole story about social protection was carried out in a more positive environment, you know. So this is the question now. How do you stabilize the region? How do you move towards peaceful settlement of disputes?
Yep. I mean, thank you to both of you. I'm going to close it now. You can clap to them. I think what we've heard is that PENHA 35 is an organization of the heart as well as the head and as well as the hands, as we saw on the video. All you need to do now is put your hands in your pockets for £20 and you can have your own personal copy signed by these two authors for no extra charge.
Good afternoon, everybody. This session will focus mainly on peace building, which, as we talk about is the challenges and prospects of sustainable peace in the Horn of Africa. And as Prof. Rita mentioned earlier this morning, that peace building and conflict resolution is a cross-cutting theme on all benefit kind of work. And as you are aware that the Horn of Africa is the most complex and unstable region of the world. This instability has created a lot of challenges to each state of the region. And so far, no effort succeeded in bringing about sustainable peace and security to the region. Several researchers has mentioned that this instability could be attributed to external and internal factors. And in fact, some of the effort which has been done so far intensified the conflict and make it or made it to be intractable violent conflicts. I will leave this floor for our two experienced panelists, Mr. Ahmed Suleiman, who is senior research fellow at the Africa program in Chatham House, and Mr. Peter Marsland, who is the chief executive of Concordus International. And I hope that after talking about challenges, there will be some prospects and some kind of roadmap which from conflict elsewhere, which we could benefit from it in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gershab, and thank you to PENHA for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here to celebrate the esteemed organisation and its anniversary. So, yeah, my work, my research focuses on the Horn of Africa region at Chatham House, and I think I'm going to try and touch in the 10 minutes or so that I have on three areas. So one is the evolving political order in the region, in the Horn. More broadly, the second is some of the external influences, as Dr. Gershab mentioned, particularly those emanating from the broader region, from the Gulf and the Middle East. And then maybe, if possible, having a bit of a zoom down and hopefully setting the path for Peter to come in and thinking about the kind of the nature of conflict resolution and peace building within the Horn of Africa region. So I think we're at a very critical juncture when we speak about the broader Horn of Africa region, and we are in a period now of I'd say the beginning of a very substantial political transition in the region. Since 2018, we've had very significant political shifts. I could argue the most significant political shifts in the region since the Cold War, manifest particularly in contestations within the dominant regimes within the Horn of Africa region, in particular Ethiopia, as well as in Sudan, which has been mentioned, of course. Those really predicated on the fall of the previous political settlements and hegemonic orders in Ethiopia led by the EPRDF and in Sudan by the National Congress Party. Within each of these two states, domestic policy and governance was closely connected with those regimes' foreign policy, and they sought, both of them, both governments, sometimes in contestation with each other, sometimes in alliance, to shape a regional system in which they influence the political, security, economic, even ideological interests and affairs of neighboring states, be they Djibouti, Eritrea, Somalia and Somali territories, and of course latterly South Sudan too, following its independence. I think this is why the recent wars we have seen, in northern Ethiopia, the Tigray war that started in 2020, and of course the devastating war that we're now experiencing in Sudan since April 2023, have very quickly become regionalized. They're not domestic conflicts. They don't require domestic solutions. They're transnational conflicts at heart. And we see the Horn again as an area, as it has been in the past, of strategic competition and shifting alliances and interests between the neighboring states, and now a much broader set of actors. So for the Horn, I think, as I said at the outset, I think we're at the beginning, or part way through the beginning of a reshaping of the political order in the region, one which is likely to continue at least for the next 5 to 10 years, and which will, of course, define the nature of stability or instability that we see. Ethiopia is a critical part of this. The emergence of Abiy Ahmed and his attempts, I think, to strengthen his position at the center by weakening the regional federal member states is something that is defining his governance, and we don't have a political settlement. We don't have that in Ethiopia at the moment, and what does that mean for essentially nation states within a federal country? Will we see increasing fragmentation based on growing ethnic nationalism, which we're seeing in parts of the country, which we've experienced in Tigray, which we're seeing in the Amhara region, in Oromia, and other parts of the country as well. In Sudan, of course, I think governance is also a part of this, and we have essentially what is being propagated now is a reversal of the Bashir era center-periphery wars. So a strong center which kept the regions and federal states at bay through war, through conflict, and now we have the war being brought to the center by some of the marginal actors, and we see that, of course, through the formation and emboldening of the RSF during the transitional period, but we also see that as a result of partly of the Juba Peace Agreement too, and some of the actors that came to the center through the Juba Peace Agreement that are now, either supporting the warring parties or certainly part of the war in some way, shape, or form. And of course, the region is broader. There are uncertainties around Eritrea, and what we will see. Obviously, we know the nature of governance there hasn't changed, and won't change for some time until the leadership changes. But I'm not going to either speculate about what that leadership change might look like and when it will happen, because I think that's a fool's errand. But of course, there's also a lot of uncertainty in South Sudan too, in Uganda, and also in Djibouti. We have this very fine line between very narrow authoritarian forms of governance and succession, and what that means in the medium term in the region. And then I'd be remiss, if we're talking about the greater IGAD countries, to not mention Kenya's regional role, especially sitting here in capital in London and thinking about Western engagement with Kenya in particular. And I think there are a lot of hopes, or there were a lot of hopes and have been placed in Kenya, certainly under Ruto's administration, that it can emerge as a serious regional anchor, a standard bearer of some form of democratic governance in the region. But I think some of those hopes have been shot down fairly early on, given the government's crackdown on civil society in the wake of protests there. And I think there's an understanding, perhaps, that there's a need not to invest in individual leaders, be they Ruto, be they Abiy, or anyone else, but certainly in institutions, and certainly in civic institutions as well. But Kenya's role over the coming years will be very interesting to see. I think the main thing here, the point that I wanted to make around this area, is that conflict in the region now is very transnational, and we have these cross-regional influences which are increasingly important to shaping the political transitions in the Horn of Africa. Sudan is very much a test case in that regard, given the nature of influences coming from the neighbouring countries, and also the pervasiveness of the war economy, and how that is spreading to neighbouring countries, and the influence of those from further afield, in particular the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey, as well as Western actors. And this brings me on to the second point, which is around the influence of Middle Eastern countries, in particular the Gulf states in the Horn, and how that's been increasing over several years. I think I make this argument in our research, which is that, and it holds true to some extent, but not fully, and I appreciate that. But the Horn and the Gulf, across the Red Sea anyway, should increasingly be seen as part of a connected sub-region. And in particular, what we see in terms of the transitions in the Horn of Africa is in part mirrored in some of the Gulf states. You know, these are happening in parallel to wider changes in the Gulf MENA state systems, in particular in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia with a very ambitious new or relatively new monarch there, and that is to some extent increasing these regional interdependencies between the Horn and the Gulf region, and to some extent this is very asymmetric. You know, the Horn increasingly is forming part of the Gulf's second tier relationships, you might say, but within that is very important to their post-carbon, their post-fuel oil economic and security horizons. Some of this you see in the UAE's very aggressive foreign policy, very interventionist foreign policy in the Horn of Africa, in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in parts of Somalia, and that's pursued both politically, economically, and through military interests. We also see, of course, food security, critical minerals, other commodities, agriculture, maritime security, and trade in particular as well, being vital to those interests. And in that, the Horn is seen as a bit as a dependent periphery, with assets such as cheap labor, as I mentioned, land, and those minerals, which are important for the Gulf states as they transition away from their current dependency on oil and try to diversify. Part of that is also driven through this contestation, which some colleagues within our Armenia department say is existential between the Saudis and the Emiratis now, and their two governments. And I should mention Egypt too, which of course has substantial economic ties and investments and interests in Sudan, very close military and political ties, as well as intercommunal people-to-people ties, and expanding interests elsewhere in the Horn. Of course, we've seen them using the levers at their disposure in terms of political alliances with Eritrea and the Somali federal government to try and pressure Ethiopia within the region too. So there's a lot happening in terms of the kind of the broader interconnectivity of these two regions. Thirdly, just a quick word on conflict resolution and peace building in the region, and again a kind of nod to the need for these to consider the broader environment in which we're operating and not really be focused within the nation state any longer. They need to be transnational in nature in terms of peace building efforts and high level mediations, and that's due because of these multi-layered interests and the multipolar dynamics which we see more globally speaking, which means that the kind of traditional approach of leverage, in particular from Western actors on regional Gulf states or other actors such as Egypt, simply aren't fit for purpose anymore. I think considering the political settlement, for example, in Sudan, we need to think about not only state interests, but sub-regional, sub-national, non-state stakeholders within a kind of wider conflict ecosystem. And that consists of political, economic, military, civic and ideological networks as well. And then more broadly, these high level efforts should be part of a spectrum of peace building processes, and very much within the nature of what we're saying in the region, with very turbulent political transitions and shrinking civic space. I think a focus on subnational local peace building efforts and institutions is essential. Trying to work towards strengthening the agency and resilience of local actors, civic community groups, including incentivizing them not to be co-opted or engage in violence. Of course, intercommunal coordination efforts, whether that be through native or tribal authorities, or through intergenerational schemes to kind of bring together different age groups, supporting youth groups, for example, that help to foster social cohesion. I think these are extremely important at this time and during this kind of state level political uncertainty that we have in the Horn. So I'll stop there and pass over to Peter.
Okay. Thank you, Ahmed, for this bold intervention and saying that the conflict in the region is a transitional conflict, and also is the Gulf is connected to the region, shall we say so? But I will now pass the floor to Peter to see if there are any local solutions, because the time is now, and then we can give them the floor for some comments and questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. Well, it is a huge pleasure to be here to help celebrate this important 35th anniversary. And what's fascinating, I think, is we started talking about climate change and building adaptation to the effects of climate change. And one of the things that comes out of the 35 years of research and investment that has gone in through this organisation, through PENHA, has been, of course, that transhumance, seasonal cattle movements, that's adaptation, resilient adaptation to the effects of climate change, kind of before that was fashionable. Now we're all talking about resilient adaptation to the effects of climate change, and rightly so. But actually, of course, these mechanisms, these tools, these governance systems that have enabled people and goods and livestock to move enormous distances backwards and forwards across international borders, that is an important part of the current adaptation to the effects of climate change, and it was ever thus. It's a great, I'm representing Concordis International. We are a peace building organisation, also celebrating our 20th birthday. We're mere youngsters in this context, but Concordis actually set up and we've been working for 20 years in Sudan and southern Sudan, as was, and now South Sudan. And I just want to start by just my heart going out to Sudanese friends, colleagues here in the room and online, who it's just been our honour and our privilege to walk with you through the highs and lows and lower lows of the last 20 years of Sudanese history. Concordis' inception actually was during all the negotiations of what became the CPA, the agreement that ended the Sudanese civil war, and there's lots of conversations between the delegations from the north and south, and they were looking at the sort of 7 barriers that were issues between over the cessation and the treaty, and part of Concordis' role was to come in and say, look, you've got some stuff you're trying to negotiate around where is the border going to go up here or down here, or should we put a dotted line around Abyei because it's a bit difficult, or where this is some of your discussions, and there are some really important debates here. But one of the questions is, how is this newfound international border going to function? And I know there were many of those conversations. And as a Brit, of course, we've not learned any of those net lessons because we've just set up a nice international border and suddenly realised that customs unions become rather complicated. And actually, people, goods and livestock need to move across those borders, and it actually becomes quite difficult. And that's in the context of a new international border where people, goods and livestock have moved backwards and forwards for generations. Where, and that needs to continue to happen, where these two new countries, if I can call them that, Sudan and South Sudan, a smaller Sudan and South Sudan, they're going to be dependent on one another for global trade, for international trade, and that's got to somehow work. And this border's got to work as a securitized border, and you know, it's not for us Hawajis to put too fine a point on it, but you know, you guys haven't been getting on terribly well for a while, and if the new Sudanese army and the South Sudanese army, let's say the South Sudanese army are chasing cattle rustlers, and they get to this new international border and they cross that border, that's not going to end well. So we're going to need to have some quite difficult conversations about security protocols and how that's all going to work. All of which has got to be within the context of engagement at Khartoum level, engagement at Juba level, recognising that these borderland issues have massive security and jurisdictional issues at the capital city levels, but they've also got enormous significance at the local level, the borderlands level, where frankly the conflict can be experienced most acutely. And so part of those peace processes that came about were looking at how can this border work so that it actually works for the benefit of the people who live in the borderlands, including the transhumant communities, the nomadic communities that we're wanting to move their cattle from summer to winter, wet season to dry season grazing. And part of what came out of that, we've been working in Abyei, which for many colleagues will know this is contested territory between the two countries, and actually even saying it's contested territory is a contested term. And yet trying to work out, so how can this process work for the benefit of the people in Abyei? Because, not to put too fine a point on it, the Abyei Protocol, which was intended to share oil wealth with the people of Abyei, didn't share so much oil wealth with the people of Abyei. And so a really fascinating part was putting in place the market, which eventually is situated in Amiet, which is right in the middle of the Abyei box. And just as a peace building process and looking at the peace dividends that can be created, those, because the land is contested, those from the south say, well, this is a borderland market. The border is way up here in the north. So if you're going to have a border market, it's got to be up here in Diffra, which the southerners call Kedge. The southerners said, well, look, this is kind of shared space, so we've got a right to move our cattle into this space. Actually, they're perfectly reasonable and right for us to move our cattle and our goods down south to the sort of southern part of the Abyei box, to Abyei town. There's a perfectly good market there. But of course, that really upset the southerners. And so you've just got this really difficult, actually, international conflict between Juba and Khartoum that's not been remotely resolved to this day. And what happened is that people in Abyei decided, through a long, literally 2-year process of negotiation and dialogue, which we were privileged to help facilitate along with other colleagues. And funnily enough, they put the market in the middle. And the Northerners didn't like it terribly much, and the Southerners didn't like it terribly much. But that's where it was. And from time to time, I'm sorry to say that market burns down. It's made of grass thatch and wood, sort of traditional materials. And in fact, I was there once when it burnt down. The fire caught just about from here to the camera away from me. It was nothing to do with me, and I don't really like putting myself in the centre of the story, but this whole thing, the whole market took up in flames. And it was absolutely tragic, because we are super excited about this market. We're excited about the way this actually is a pragmatic solution to a very difficult international problem, a very local solution. And at the same time, while this was all burning, there are 3,000 shops there. It's a wholesale trade of food, and there were literally hundreds of tons of food literally going up in flames, whilst parts of South Sudan were going into ICP level 5 famine. And we're watching this happen and thinking, God, this is awful. I mean, this is just dreadful. Cut to, I did an appeal. I worked for an international organisation, did an appeal. We shall rebuild. But we were forbidden from having any part in the rebuild. We were actually forbidden by Northerners and Southerners, and I'm not critical of either, but they have their positions, and I get that. And so they refused any international money to rebuild the Amiet market. 5 weeks later, every single one of those 3,000 shops had been rebuilt. Every single one. And funnily enough, though the authorities from the north said, it needs to be a bit further south, and the authorities from the south it needs to be a bit further north, they put it back where it was. And so, friends, a really interesting piece as we look at pastoralism, as we look at some of these really thorny questions of international politics, which Ahmed has, I know you've only just started scratching the surface of your amazing research that you do. But we've got these incredibly difficult international geopolitics that are at play, and they are real. And a really interesting part is, and a question I think for you, and maybe a question for PENHA as we look for the future, is what is the part that could be played to be working on local solutions to some of these very, very difficult challenges? So actually we are working at a regional level, we are working at a geopolitical level, but we're doing it locally. Because to me, when you look at something like the Amiet market, where money is being created, not by some cash for work program, not for some livelihoods generation program, not for some aid or World Food Program or any of those others, not knocking any of those, but it was through trade between herders and farmers, trying to change the incentives such that actually there is a strong incentive for peace, and actually there's quite a strong disincentive for being mean to each other. And so if I could land this in Darfur, and again our hearts go out to all that is going on in Darfur, and for those of us who are thin enough on top to remember the genocides of 20 years ago, we're looking at this with some trepidation. And without making any political comments on any of this, Concordis guards our impartiality very closely and carefully, but we are seeing food and aid being used as a weapon of war in this context. Last year, the last growing season, the crops pretty much failed in South Darfur. And there were a number of reasons for that. The war broke out on the 15th of April. People were very fearful about putting crops in the ground. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of displacement, a lot of movement of people. But also, all of the traditional mechanisms for managing kind of herder-farmer relations and for managing sort of how the farmland should be protected, the crops should be protected, broke down in the course of the war. And the crops that were in the ground, most of them were destroyed. And then, of course, there was the conflict on top of that. And much of the harvest last year failed. And this year, through a number of very practical, very pragmatic peace processes that we were able to work with. And this is, I'm speaking to you again as a Hawaja representing the organisation, but these are all our Sudanese colleagues who are working with a network. We have Sudanese and Central African and South Sudanese and Chadian and Cameroonian colleagues who are doing actually all the work, working with a network of 600 community peace builders. And so there in South Darfur, there's this great network of about 220 peace builders, including people from the native administration, from the traditional leadership. And they came to that realization that no one's coming to help them. There's very little aid that's going to be allowed across that Chadian border. And if they are going to live, if they are going to feed their families, those crops need to go into the ground. Those crops need to be protected. Those relations with transhumant groups need to be managed properly. And those crops need to be harvested. And there's a lot of heartbreak in the work we all do. There's a lot of very bad days in the work we do and the lives we choose to lead. But one of the things that has happened, and I want to end lightly, is that the harvest just now is being brought in many parts of South Darfur. And the reason for that is not because those long-standing conflicts and land conflicts and territorial conflicts have all been resolved overnight, but because communities and their often quite junior community leaders have realised that no bugger's coming to feed them. And if they're going to feed their families, they need to get the crops in the ground, they need to manage herder-farmer relationships, and they need to ensure they've got pragmatic solutions that will last for this next season. And then our hope and prayer, of course, is that that will happen next year, and then next year, and then next year, as Ahmed and the geopolitics whirl around us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for this positive note at the end of the talk. And I just remember that about Abyei, the Messeria and the Denkanukok has been in good relation for ages. I think it is the politics which bring the conflicts. And one of the things is the weak governance and corruption, marginalization. All these are the things which drove the conflict. Okay, I will give the floor for 2 to 3 comments because now we don't have time a lot about comments or questions. Ammar?
Hi, my name is Ammar, Sudanese politician. My question is that now we have a new war in Sudan. Actually, it's not new, more than 19. It's just like 19 months now. And the situation itself in the Horn of Africa and in the Red Sea is very difficult to be described, as the conflicts are here and there. So what do you think about the near future on how the conflict in Sudan will affect the region? Thank you.
Can we take another question or comments and then they can respond to it?
As a Somali, as you all know, for the last 30-something years, Somalia is been in and out of war. No, completely unstable, I could say, except that north part, Somaliland. And I am really sorry that when I hear about Sudan for the last 2 years, it's really very sad. What do you think about, is it very likely that Sudan could end up like Somalia?
You've painted a pretty bleak picture, if you don't mind me saying so, and I guess it's deserved. But are there any positive spots that you see are there any rays of hope somewhere in the region? It is very large and very diverse.
Okay, those are all really pertinent, really difficult questions to answer. To start with Amar, I think that, as I was mentioning, the war in Sudan is a regional war. It is not a war only within the confines of Sudan's borders. I think all of the neighboring states, to some degree, are impacted. You see the picture when it comes to the outflow of refugees and the impact that that is having within Chad, within Egypt, within South Sudan. We haven't touched on the broader geopolitical interests, but they are there too. I think, as you say, the war economy is evolving as well. So I think this is a part of it. I mean, one of the interesting areas in the research that we're doing at the moment, looking at cross-border conflict, is focused on one commodity, on gold, and how this is both fueling the war, sustaining the war, but actually what impact it is having in the neighboring regions. And why I describe, Sudan's war as being part of a conflict ecosystem is largely because of this. You have these networks of interests. Gold is an assemblage, I think, to this too. So one of the fascinating dynamics is to look at, the networks of connectivity of gold from RSF controlled areas through Chad, through South Sudan and into East Africa. Also to look at the from the SAF and I guess Port Sudan authorities areas of control. The majority of the gold we know goes to the United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates it's either in first order directly, including from army controlled areas, or second order, and that means through neighboring countries. So one of the products of this war is that the gold, for example, which is sustaining and fueling the warring parties, is also really important for livelihoods. It's one of the the economic factors keeping people afloat during the war, particularly in artisanal miners, and we know that that's 80 to 90% of people. So it is also within Egypt sustaining increasingly, and Sudanese expertise, artisanal mining expertise, sustaining and supporting Egypt's economy, both through the transfer of gold illicitly and legally, and that being used to buy and purchase commodities, used to exchange as well, so for currency exchange. So I think, and also to open new production areas in southern Egypt. So one of the things that we're seeing is that the war economy is having impacts across the neighboring countries, and we also need to think about how that ties into these global and middle order powers that have an interest within the region and what their interests are. Turning to the I guess the question around whether or not we will seek fragmentation on the level of Somalia, I hope not. Inshallah, that's not going to be the case. But of course, we are already seeing de facto fragmentation in Sudan. We already have lines of control, and the RSF has been pushing to take all of the capitals of the Darfuri states. It of course has large parts of the capital as well, and has pushed successfully into central and tried to move into eastern Sudan. Now we have a pushback by the army and joint Darfuri forces as well to try and regain some of that control, but I don't think either of the sides is able to strategically remove the other. So we have a de facto fragmentation of Sudan at this moment in time, but what could worsen would, if we don't see the urgency required to both push towards a ceasefire and frankly speaking, in my view, not only prioritize the warring parties here, but think about the civilians and the role of civilians and their interests in the future of Sudan, is increasing militarization. And militarization of the civilian population. Now, have we gone from this being a war between warring parties to one where it is a civil war? I think we're getting there now. The population are being militarized, arms are flooding into the country, and we're getting to a situation where it could be, very difficult. We would see a very long time before we can reverse those dynamics. And there's certainly not ones that can be controlled by the two major warring parties themselves, let's say. So much more focus now on the subnational issues and different areas of control, and which armed groups or commanders are controlling these areas, which ultimately leads to these fiefdoms. You have a governance vacuum for a time, and then you have these emerging fiefdoms, with armed control. So unfortunately, that is what we're seeing, and that is why the urgency is there now to find some sort of ceasefire, but the priority is to support Sudanese civilians in charting the future for the country, not to enable the warring parties to do so, and to dictate the terms on which that is agreed. And do we have any positive spots in the Horn of Africa? Yes, there are lots of positive areas in the Horn. I think we shouldn't leave today, and I'm sure it's been mentioned earlier, without talking about the Somaliland elections. I mean, that's in it. Those elections, a peaceful transfer of power from one leader to another, despite seemingly a very fractious build-up and an environment, certainly regionally, which might have proved hostile to that election process. We've seen a fairly stable transfer of power there, and the ability also of civilians to continue throughout the region to hold their governments and political elites to account, and to continue to pressure them. I think that is, will continue, that will remain, even within restrictive environments, a huge bright spot. And as we were hearing in the presentations earlier, the focus really on resilience and ensuring community cohesion within the region, and the interconnectivity of peoples, which will outlast and goes beyond any era of political leadership or any interests of political elites, despite attempts to divide people along ethnic and other lines. So I think there's a lot of positives to shout about within the region, and ultimately, hopefully, we will return to a time where we're talking about positive integration or engagement between states, less hostility, and thinking about the broader connectivities, infrastructure, people to people, and otherwise between countries that we have done not so long ago.
Thank you for that. I would say there's nothing new under the sun about regional aspects of these conflicts. So actually, if you think back, the impacts of Sudanese politics in South Sudan, in Chad, Chadian politics in Central African Republic, and so the circle goes around. The regional dynamics of all of these conflicts has always been there, I think. But actually, so yeah, there will be those regional impacts. But also you can look at it the other way around. Ahmed has already talked about the economy, the war economies that are going on, looking at gold, but also looking at Central African diamonds and livestock as well. Indeed. And every conflict, every war, in my limited and humble experience, is made up of a million choices. Every conflict is made up of the choice that comes when people, under very difficult circumstances, do they have the choice as to whether they fight or do not fight? And if they do have that choice, what choice do they make? When there's a confrontation between, if we really generically say, a herder and a farmer, forgive, in this context I'm desperately avoiding kind of herder-farmer binary dynamics, but let's say there's a conflict between this herder and this farmer, and there's an altercation, whether it's a cattle rustling or a destruction of crops. There's a choice. Do people take up arms, or do they negotiate? Sometimes people feel that they have very little choice, but our work, surely, is to give them better options and better choices. And the really interesting piece is that it's not just those people right at the front line of the conflict who have a choice to make as to whether they send their sons to fight for this group, this armed group, that militia. or actually say, do you know what? I see your fight, but actually I'm sending my son to farm the field or to move the livestock. I'm not going to send my son to fight in the armed group. We're going to negotiate. Now, I know how trite and simplistic I'm being. But actually I know how realistic this can be with very, very careful negotiation. So the regional dynamic as well is, if these two protagonists choose, we are going to buy in, we're going to use our livestock or our agriculture or our diamonds or our gold to buy in foreign protection, that's a choice that has very, very global impacts, not just in the Middle Eastern region, but further north and east. But if they choose to negotiate, that will also have corresponding impacts on the region. And so my hope, if we're going to end on a hope, my hope is actually that there are opportunities to help people make better choices. And actually, in the absolutely nicest possible way to politicians present, one of the things that can be really, really great is when people hear populist politicians, present company definitely accepted, when people hear populist politicians and say, do you know what, all of your problems, it's their fault, and you'll solve all your problems by killing them. And there are varying narratives of that around populist politicians globally. And frankly, one of the choices we really want people to make is to say, do you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. And disregard those narratives. And that's the bit actually I've got some hope for, because what's really exciting is you see, and it's our privilege to see and spend time with and witness and be with people who have very, very bravely stood up to those who say, what you need to do is to fight. And they've said, not gonna. And that's pretty cool.
Thank you. Well, we are coming now to the close. Is there any burning question?
The Sudanese I knew in the past, Khartoum University, the civil society, the discussions, the newspapers, I don't know what has gone wrong, I enjoyed that freedom. Within the Horn of Africa, I think the Sudanese were the most open, but political. I mean, I met Sudanese in the university, my colleagues, they have a go at the politician, oh, that guy is an idiot, You don't hear that in the other parts of the world. So what I'm trying to say is, what happened to that Sudanese decency of the civil society, of the academia, of the voice even of the religious leaders, whether Christian? What happened to all that? I mean, this is really, because we are somehow avoiding that. And those structures, as far as I know, I hope, from what I know, are very powerful. I mean, in other countries, yes, I can tell you that. The religious leaders are told to keep business, In Sudan, that was my hope. And the civil society in general, we haven't talked about it. What role do we have? Are we cattle? Are we going to die, all of us? I mean, this is a shame on the region, Because that's it. Yeah, done.
Baraka?
I enjoyed the panel. Briefly, it was really easily forecastable to have two armies in the same country, and this was kind of time bomb. One day can really erupt. This happens in Ethiopia between federal army and regional armies, and in Sudan at the same time. So what's your intake, Ahmed, about having two armies in the same country? And it's what could be also happen. So what's your intake, this one? Secondly, there was, especially when Dr. Takasa was there was a promotion of that local solutions for local problems. To have a solution within the region, within the country, within the region, rather than waiting from these Eurocentric approaches for peace building and peacemaking. So, where are IGAD and other regional forces to stop, to prevent first Sudan's conflict? At the same time, when it was erupted, was there any kind of intervention, really tangible intervention to stop the war? And what do you see? Do you see any future in terms of local solutions for local problems. Thank you.
So, of course, in every civil society across every nation, you'll have people who will disagree with each other. And you will have people who think that this person is right and this person is an idiot and all those kind of things. And you'll have all of those views. And then, again, telling people stuff they know. But of course, then when people face grievance and they face hardship and they face conflict, it's quite a natural human reaction to take quite an antagonistic and polarized effect. And for those of, as a Brit, I'll just raise you Brexit. I mean, for goodness sake, you know, even that could just divide families. Scottish devolution can divide families, and these are really very trite issues compared to armed conflict. And so, yes, of course, there are these wonderfully educated voices and well-formed civil society, but of course they come under huge threat. And so I am a big advocate for local solutions to local problems, of course. And sometimes I know that when I have a problem myself, sometimes it's quite helpful to have a mediator just to help me manage that conflict through. And I think if I can say that, and I say that with real humility in this context, for all of us to work out how do we get the best out of everything we can give. So of course we get local solutions, but of course we also are willing to just ask for help when we need it, and to make sure that that's done where power rests in the right places, where it's not done in an authoritarian way, where it's not done in a draconian way. But actually, of course, many people are very hurt, very wounded, very upset, and that can be a really tough place for people to be with. And so, of course, people can become angry. And I should say, when I just do my last piece, for choices that we all make, there are choices for diaspora to make too. There are choices for diaspora to make about the things that they trumpet and the things that they shout down, the things that they praise, the things that they re-X or they repost on social media. And so for all of us looking to use the power, the influence and the resources that we have to make good choices and choices for peace. That surely is a big mandate for all of us.
Thank you. 1 minute. Okay. So quickly on the question of armies, I think that's an excellent point. I think it's really difficult. I believe the two contexts between Ethiopia and Sudan are very different. I think some of the state security organs within Sudan were set up really to compete with each other, and we see that really in how the RSF has evolved, and how it's become a competitor to the army. But it was, of course, part of the partnership within the transitional period within the Sovereignty Council, and complicit to overthrowing the civilian cabinet at the time. So I think, you know, this is partly as a result of President Bashir not wanting to empower and embolden one armed institution more than another, and to ensure that there were checks and balances. Whereas in Ethiopia's case, I think there are merits to having regional and federal forces, but of course I think the management and the hierarchy and the structures and the command and control of those forces is something that needs to be reimagined in future, to be more cohesive, and to obviously prevent regional forces going to war with federal forces. Yes. Okay, so we'll finish on that. I think we're just on the point of where is IGAD and the African Union in the Sudan war. Unfortunately, we haven't seen enough from either of them, either individually or together. But they are vital as part of a broader constellation that that needs to really come together and unify both, I guess, the tracks around ceasefire, around humanitarian intervention, and around what the political process should be moving forward. I mean, they need to be a critical part of that, the African Union and IGAD, but I think we've seen a lot of jostling and fracturing of that process, and it needs to be unified for the benefit of Sudan and come to some form of solution as a first step reaching a ceasefire.